Curtains at Blackwood Hall blocked the fading autumn light, trapping scents of roasted game and stale wine in the dining room. Lady Eleanor Vance felt the rich soup turn to lead in her stomach. Dread coiled in her gut. Across the mahogany table, Baron Ashworth's gaze settled on her hands, then her throat, then lingered on her jaw. His small, bright eyes in his red face held a proprietary gleam that made her skin prickle. His fork clinked against his plate, a sound grating on her nerves, marking each moment she endured his presence. Eleanor focused on the lace tablecloth, tracing its faded designs to avoid his gaze. A tremor ran through her fingers locked around her water goblet. She knew dropping it would shatter the crystal and draw unwanted notice. The air felt thick, suffocating, as if the manor's dilapidated walls pressed in, reminding her of its fate. Baron Ashworth cleared his throat, a gravelly sound echoing through the silent room. "My dear Lady Eleanor," he rumbled, a self-satisfied unctuousness in his voice. "You are quiet tonight. Are you quite well?" His tone probed, asserting his right to examine her. He leaned forward, the unpleasant smell of his pomade and something metallic wafted across, making her stomach clench. Eleanor forced a brittle smile. "I am quite well, Baron. Merely contemplative," she replied softly, speaking louder might shatter the peace. She added a pleasantry to deflect him. "The pheasant is exquisite, as always." She hoped her words sounded convincing, her voice's tremor not too apparent. Lady Beatrice Vance, her mother, sat at the table's head, watchful, her gaze darting between Eleanor and the Baron, a sentinel of their family's desperate hope. Lady Beatrice offered a thin, strained smile. "Eleanor is merely excited, Baron," she interjected, her tone falsely bright, attempting to smooth the awkwardness. "Such a momentous occasion approaches. It is natural for a young lady to be lost in thought." Her mother's words felt like a betrayal, a public declaration of her sacrifice. Eleanor felt a hot flush, her cheeks burning with humiliation. She wanted to disappear into the dining room shadows. The Baron chuckled, a low sound that shivered down Eleanor's spine. "Indeed, my dear, you shall be quite the most beautiful Baroness Ashworth, the envy of all society." He raised his wineglass, his small eyes gleaming. Eleanor felt like a prize, her value assessed. She nodded faintly, unable to meet his toast. The silver locket, a Vance family heirloom, felt cold against her skin. It reminded her of the name she carried and its fading weight. Her father, long gone, would have been horrified. Later, after the Baron departed with promises of an engagement, dinner's pleasantries fell away. Lady Beatrice summoned Eleanor to the drawing room. The fire had dwindled to embers, casting shadows across the peeling wallpaper. The air, thick with old wood and lavender, now felt like decay. Beatrice paced before the cold hearth, hands clasped, her silk gown rustling. Eleanor sat on a settee, exposed, her heart a leaden weight. "Eleanor," her mother began, her voice tight, "we must speak plainly. Baron Ashworth is most pleased. His offer is beyond generous given our circumstances." Her mother gestured around the room as if the walls echoed their financial ruin. Eleanor looked at the threadbare rug, the faded tapestries, the signs of neglect. She thought of the ledgers, filled with red ink, the creditors' letters bringing fresh anxiety each morning. "Mother, must it be him?" Eleanor whispered, her voice cracking. She knew the answer. The Baron's possessive gaze, his heavy pomade scent, made her stomach churn. She felt the phantom touch of his eyes. A violation. She had dreamt of love, a true partnership, not this transaction. Lady Beatrice stopped pacing, her eyes hard. "There are no other options, Eleanor. None. Do you comprehend our predicament? Blackwood Hall, our legacy, your father's memory, all hangs by a thread. Creditors grow impatient. If this marriage does not proceed, we lose everything. We will be cast out, penniless, a disgrace." Her mother's voice rose, betraying desperation. Eleanor flinched, the words a physical blow. Her father's face, etched in the locket she clutched, seemed to watch her. The weight of her family's honor, their name, felt impossibly heavy. She envisioned her mother's frantic attempts at appearances, the compromises, the hidden anxieties. Her mother's calculating eyes now held a glimmer of fear, mirroring Eleanor's own. He is old, mother, and unpleasant, Eleanor managed, barely audible. Despair filled her that such a fate was hers. Her dreams of tenderness and affection were extinguished, replaced by cold duty. Old, yes, Lady Beatrice conceded, her voice softening, but her resolve was unshaken. But rich, Eleanor, incredibly rich. He can save us. He can secure your future and that of any children. You will want for nothing. Your sacrifice will not be in vain. She spoke of sacrifice as a simple entry. Eleanor felt a bitter taste. She was not a ledger entry. She was a woman with hopes and fears, yearning for more than a gilded cage. Eleanor rose, walking to the cold window, peering into the inky night. The moon, a thin sliver, cast shadows across the overgrown gardens. Silence stretched between them, heavy with their predicament. She knew her mother was right. No other path existed. The thought was a leaden weight, pressing down until she felt she might suffocate. Her family, her name, her father's legacy, all demanded this. Her thoughts turned to Mr. Alistair Finch. Alistair, with his easy charm, his dazzling smile, promised a love-defying society's rules. He was everything the Baron was not: young, handsome, devoted. He ignited a spark of hope, a fragile flame against the darkness. She knew he would be waiting, as always, beneath the ancient oak, where moonlight filtered through branches. Without a word to her mother, lost in grim calculations, Eleanor slipped from the drawing room. She moved through silent, shadowed corridors. The air grew colder away from the dying fire. The faint scent of old wood and lavender clung to her, a melancholic perfume. Her heart pounded with fear and anticipation. She was defying her mother, her duty, her fate, for a chance at something real, her own. She stepped into the crisp night air, the coolness a shock against her flushed skin. Gravel crunched beneath her satin slippers as she hurried along the path to the gardens. The moon, now higher, cast a glow over the unkempt grounds. The air smelled of damp earth, late jasmine, and the forbidden. Rustling leaves and a distant owl hoot usually brought comfort, but tonight amplified her urgency. He was there, a dark silhouette beneath the ancient oak. Alistair stepped forward, his handsome face lit by moonlight, his blue eyes intense. Dressed impeccably, his presence contrasted with Blackwood Hall's decaying grandeur. He held out his hands. She took them. His touch sent a jolt, a warmth chasing away the evening's chill and the dread of her impending marriage. "Eleanor," he whispered, his voice a low, passionate rumble. He pulled her gently closer, his gaze sweeping her face with admiration, a balm to her spirit. "I could not bear it, my love, the thought of you shackled to that old man, enduring his touch. It tears at my soul." His words, a passionate plea, swept away her doubts. He seemed to understand her revulsion, her agony. He cupped her face, his thumbs tracing her jaw. His touch was electric, unlike the Baron's calculating gaze. "You are meant for more than gilded misery, my darling. You are meant for love, for Barnawalbe, for a true partnership. Not a transaction, a cold bargain in a decaying estate." He painted a vivid picture of freedom and shared happiness, a beacon against the darkness. "Alistair, Eleanor began, her voice trembling, her heart pounding. Her family's demands, her mother's pleas, clashed with the longing he ignited. She was torn between duty and desire, between sacrifice and forbidden happiness. The locket pressed against her skin, a reminder of her father, the Vance name, and all she was meant to uphold. He cut her off, his voice urgent, pulling her from doubt. "No, Eleanor, listen. We must run, tonight, before they chain you to him forever, before your spirit is crushed." He looked into her eyes, pleading, offering escape. "Come with me. We will leave this suffocating world of expectation and duty. We will build a life of our own choosing, free from others." His words were a powerful potion against reality. He released her face, taking her hands firmly, his grip reassuring. "I have made arrangements. A carriage will wait on the old London road, beyond the village. We can be far away by dawn, married by noon. Think of it, Eleanor: freedom, love. A future built on our terms, not dictated by debts or legacies." He spoke of marriage so easily, a natural progression of their affection. Eleanor's mind reeled. His bold, reckless proposal should have terrified her, yet beneath the fear, defiance stirred, a surge of forbidden hope. The image of Baron Ashworth, his possessive eyes, his booming voice flashed through her mind, making her recoil. A lifetime by his side, a future devoid of affection, was a bleak landscape stretching before her. Alistair squeezed her hands, his gaze unwavering, earnest. "Say you will, my love. Come away with me. Give us a chance. Give yourself a chance." His words echoed her heart's deepest yearnings, the dreams forgotten amid her family's ruin. She felt a profound weariness, an exhaustion from the constant pressure, the endless expectations. This was a way out, perhaps the only way from a life she could not bear. The decision hung heavy, a moment she could not reverse. The moon shone, lighting the path ahead. Eleanor looked at Alistair, seeing not just a handsome face, but the promise of escape, a lifeline in her darkest hour. A fragile, desperate hope bloomed, pushing against fear, against duty. She nodded, her throat tight, a single tear tracing her cheek. "Yes," she whispered, barely audible, yet carrying the weight of her gamble. "Yes, Alistair, I will." The forbidden hope that surged through Eleanor the night before now felt like a fragile, fluttering moth trapped within her ribs. Each beat of her heart echoed the immense, irreversible step she had agreed to take. The morning light, usually a gentle comfort, felt harsh and revealing, exposing the raw fear that gnawed at her resolve. She sat on the edge of her bed, the worn silk of her nightgown cool against her skin, her gaze fixed on the familiar patterns of the aged wallpaper. Every faded rose seemed to whisper warnings of abandonment and ruin. Her family's ancestral home, Blackwood Hall, felt like a cage, yet it was the only world she had ever known. The scent of beeswax and old paper, usually comforting, now seemed to cling to her like a shroud, suffocating her with its memories. Could she truly turn her back on the decaying grandeur of these rooms, the silent testimony to generations of Vance pride? Her mother, Lady Beatrice, though often stern and distant, was still her mother, a woman hardened by circumstance, battling to keep their name from falling into utter disgrace. Eleanor imagined her mother's face, etched with a familiar despair, mixed with a new, sharper condemnation. The thought sent a cold shiver through her. Leaving her mother to face the inevitable collapse alone felt like a betrayal more profound than any she had ever considered. The weight of the Vance name pressed down on her shoulders. Her father's words, spoken softly in the flickering firelight of the library, often returned to her in moments of doubt. He would speak of their lineage, not as a boast, but as a sacred trust. He once told her that honor was not something given, but something earned and fiercely guarded. "Eleanor," he had murmured, his hand resting gently on her raven hair. "A Vance always keeps their word, and a Vance always protects their own." His voice, even in memory, carried the warmth of genuine affection and the steel of unwavering principle. She could almost feel the rough texture of his tweed jacket, the faint scent of pipe tobacco that always clung to him. She traced the tarnished silver of the locket at her throat, her fingers finding the small, intricate engraving of the soaring falcon, the Vance crest. Inside, a miniature portrait of her father, his kind eyes smiling back at her from beneath the glass. He had been a man of integrity, deeply devoted to his family and to the land they had stewarded for centuries. He had instilled in her a profound sense of duty, a belief that their family's legacy was not just about wealth or status, but about standing firm, even in the face of adversity. The very act of eloping, of running away, felt like a direct defiance of everything he had taught her, a shameful stain on the honor he held so dear. A deep ache settled in her chest, a physical manifestation of her internal war. Her father had died believing in her strength, in her unwavering adherence to their values. How could she now, in her moment of greatest despair, shatter that image entirely? She pictured the grand yet dusty portrait gallery downstairs, where ancestors with stern, unyielding gazes watched over the hall. Their eyes, in her mind, followed her every move, judging her impending flight, condemning her for abandoning her post. The thought of their silent disapproval was almost as painful as the thought of her mother's cutting words. Yet another voice whispered in her mind, a voice that sounded like her own desperate longing for a life not dictated by financial ruin or an old baron's grasping hands. Was it truly honor to sacrifice herself, to become a living dowry for a man who saw her as mere property? Was it loyalty to remain trapped in a gilded cage, watching her spirit wither away? Alistair's promises, though perhaps uttered with too much theatrical flourish, had painted a picture of freedom, of choosing her own path. A path where love, however fragile, might be possible. The memory of his ardent gaze, the pressure of his hand, offered a fleeting warmth against the chill of her fear. The morning hours crawled by, each minute stretching into an eternity of agonizing reflection. The distant clatter of pots from the kitchen, the muffled voices of servants going about their daily routines, all seemed to underscore the normalcy she was about to shatter. She moved through the house like a ghost, touching familiar objects. A porcelain figurine on a mantelpiece, a worn velvet armchair in the drawing room, as if imprinting their textures on her memory. Each touch was a silent goodbye, a surrender to the inevitable. The air in the house, usually still, felt charged with an unspoken tension, mirroring the tempest within her. Around midday, a soft knock came at her chamber door. It was Mary, one of the younger housemaids, her face usually bright, now pale and drawn. Mary clutched a small, folded note in her hand, her eyes darting nervously towards the corridor. "Lady Eleanor," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "A message from Mr. Finch. He said it was most urgent." Her hand trembled slightly as she offered the paper. Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. This was it then, the confirmation, the point of no return she had been dreading and longing for. She took the note, her fingers brushing Mary's cold ones, and the servant curtsied quickly, melting away down the passage as if afraid to linger near the forbidden communication. Eleanor unfolded the note, her hands shaking slightly. The paper was thin, the ink a familiar dark blue. Alistair's elegant script, usually so charming, now looked like a series of irrevocable decrees. The message was brief, coded in a way only they would understand. It spoke of a carriage waiting at the old oak tree on the north path, precisely at midnight. A time when the household would be deep in slumber, when the moon would cast long, deceiving shadows across the estate. The cold, precise details of the rendezvous sent a fresh wave of terror and exhilaration through her. Midnight. The very word hung in the air, heavy with consequence. She reread the note, her eyes lingering on the last line, a hastily scrawled, "My dearest love, soon you will be free." The words were meant to reassure, to inspire hope, but they instead brought a fresh wave of doubt. Was this truly freedom, or merely an exchange of one form of captivity for another? The scent of the paper, faint and slightly musky, offered no comfort. It was merely a piece of paper, a silent harbinger of her fate. Her mind raced, cataloging the risks. Discovery meant ruin, public humiliation for herself and further disgrace for her family. Baron Ashworth, a man known for his vindictive nature, would ensure their complete downfall if she defied him so brazenly. But to stay meant a slow, agonizing death of her spirit, a life devoid of genuine affection or choice. The image of the Baron's heavy-lidded eyes, his thick fingers drumming impatiently on the dining table, resurfaced with sickening clarity. That life, that fate, was simply unbearable. A new resolve, brittle yet firm, began to set in. The time for deliberation was over. The message was delivered, the die was cast. She had made her choice, however terrifying. She would not be bought and sold like a prized broodmare. She would not live a life of quiet desperation. With a deep, shuddering breath, Eleanor rose from the bed, her movements suddenly imbued with a fierce, desperate purpose. The soft light filtering through the window seemed to dim, deepening the shadows in the corners of the room, as if the world itself was holding its breath. She walked to the large carved wardrobe, its dark wood smelling faintly of solder and mothballs. Her hand hovered over the heavy gowns, the silks and velvets that represented her station, her past. These garments, though beautiful, were relics of a life she was abandoning. She reached instead for a simpler, darker traveling dress, one made of sturdy wool, less conspicuous, better suited for a desperate flight. The fabric felt rough beneath her fingers, a stark contrast to the delicate laces she usually wore. From a dusty hat box, she retrieved a small, unassuming travel bag made of sturdy leather, its clasp still gleaming faintly. It was a bag she had not used since childhood journeys to visit distant relatives. A lifetime ago, it seemed. She laid it carefully on her bed, the worn quilt beneath it absorbing the faint thud. Her mind worked methodically, pushing down the rising tide of emotion. What did one take when abandoning an entire life? Only the absolute essentials, the things that could not be replaced, the things that would offer some meager comfort in the unknown. She chose a fresh shift, a pair of warm stockings, and a sturdy pair of walking boots. Each item was folded with meticulous care, her hands moving with an almost ritualistic precision, as if the order in her packing could somehow impose order on the chaos within her soul. The rustle of the fabric against the leather bag was the only sound in the quiet room, a small rhythmic whisper of her impending departure. She included a small pouch containing a few coins she had managed to save from her meager allowance over the years. A paltry sum, but her only claim to independent wealth. As she placed a thin, leather-bound volume of poetry, a gift from her father, into the bag, her eyes blurred. A single tear escaped, tracing a hot path down her cheek. Then another, and another until her vision was obscured by a shimmering veil. The book felt impossibly heavy in her hands, a final link to the intellectual comfort and quiet joy she was leaving behind. She blinked, trying to clear the moisture, but the tears kept falling, unchecked, burning her eyes. Each drop felt like a tiny farewell, a lament for the innocence she was shedding, for the life she was forever severing. The small bag, now half filled, sat on the bed like a silent accomplice. It was a testament to the magnitude of her decision, a physical representation of the slender thread of hope she clung to. She looked at it, then back at the familiar room, now seen through a haze of tears, the intricate patterns of the wallpaper, the sturdy oak of the wardrobe. The very air seemed to press in around her. In that moment, with the silent bag before her, Eleanor knew with a chilling certainty that there was no turning back from this perilous path. The clock on the mantelpiece in her chamber chimed 10 times, each stroke a hammer blow against the fragile shell of her resolve. Eleanor had spent the evening in a trance, barely tasting the simple supper, her answers to her mother's distant inquiries vague and automatic. Lady Beatrice Vance had been preoccupied with the next day's accounts, a familiar distant hum of worry that now felt alien to Eleanor. She sat at her dressing table, watching her own reflection. The young woman staring back possessed the same delicate features, the same raven hair, but her eyes held a new burning desperation. Every shadow in her familiar room seemed to stretch and twist, embodying the enormity of her decision. Her fingers traced the cool silver of her locket, the soaring falcon a stark reminder of the family honor she was about to defy. Her father's miniature portrait inside felt heavy against her thumb. He had spoken often of duty, of the Vance name, of the responsibilities that came with their lineage. Now she was choosing a different path, one carved out of a desperate hope for personal freedom, a path that felt both exhilarating and terrifyingly wrong. She had rehearsed the route 100 times in her mind, mapping each creaking floorboard, each moonlit window. The back staircase, seldom used by the family, offered the most direct and discreet escape. Its steps were covered in threadbare carpet, muffling the sound of footsteps, a blessing she counted on. The servant's entrance would lead her into the overgrown kitchen garden, then through a narrow gate into the old apple orchard. Beyond that, the dense, untamed woods, where Alistair promised to be waiting. A shiver ran through her, not from the chill in the air, but from the cold certainty of her impending flight. She had packed only the barest necessities, a change of clothes, a small purse containing the few coins she possessed, and her father's locket. Each item felt heavy, weighted with the unspoken farewells and shattered expectations. The worn valise sat beside her bed, a silent accomplice in her rebellion. She looked around the room, the familiar four walls that had housed her entire life, a gilded cage she was about to abandon. The scent of lavender from the potpourri bowl mingled with the faint metallic tang of fear in her mouth. The house settled into its nightly slumber. The last distant clatter of pots from the kitchen had faded, the soft murmur of servants' voices long silenced. Only the occasional groan of ancient timbers or the whisper of wind against the leaded panes broke the profound stillness. Eleanor rose from her chair, her movements slow, deliberate, as if each action might trigger an alarm. Her heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs, a drumbeat of panic and resolve. She smoothed the skirt of her plain, dark traveling dress, chosen for its anonymity. The silk felt cool against her skin, a stark contrast to the burning heat in her cheeks. She moved to her vanity, its polished surface reflecting the pale glow of the single candle she allowed herself. A blank sheet of parchment lay waiting, her inkwell open, the quill dipped and ready. This was perhaps the hardest part, harder than the clandestine planning, harder than the act of leaving itself. Writing to her mother. How could she explain? How could she apologize for the pain she knew she would cause, for the shame she would bring upon the Vance name, for abandoning her family in their desperate hour? Her hand trembled as she picked up the quill, a single drop of ink blooming like a dark flower on the pristine paper. What words could capture the suffocating dread of marrying Baron Ashworth, the desperate yearning for a life unchained, the belief in a love that promised freedom? None seemed adequate. She started to write, her script usually so elegant, now jagged and uneven. Mother, please forgive me. The words felt hollow, a pathetic excuse for a daughter who was running away. She imagined Lady Beatrice finding the note, her face hardening into that familiar mask of disappointment, her lips thinning. The thought made a fresh wave of grief well up inside Eleanor. She scratched out the line, tearing the paper in frustrated silence. No, she could not ask for forgiveness. Not yet. Not when she still felt the fierce, defiant certainty that this was her only choice. She tried again, a more formal opening, but her mind was a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Love for her mother, yes, a deep, complicated love, but also a simmering resentment for the path her mother had chosen for her. A mother who saw her as a solution to financial woes, a pawn in a game of survival. The scent of old paper and dust from the vanity drawers seemed to mock her attempts at articulation. Her breath hitched. She could not write it. The words would be a lie, or they would be too true, too raw, too condemning. She folded a fresh sheet of parchment into a small square, tucked it beneath her locket on the vanity, and pressed her palm against it. It was a silent testament, a promise to herself that one day she would explain, one day she would make amends. But for now, silence was her only mercy. The act of leaving it unsent, unread, was a temporary shield against the crushing weight of guilt. She heard the faint hoot of an owl from the garden, a mournful sound that echoed the ache in her chest. With a final, lingering look at her chamber, a place of both comfort and confinement, Eleanor extinguished the candle. The room plunged into absolute darkness, save for the sliver of moonlight filtering through the heavy curtains. She stood for a moment, letting her eyes adjust, letting the silence envelop her. Every nerve ending felt alive, hyper-aware. The faint smell of beeswax polish from the furniture, the ghost of her own perfume, the chill seeping from the window pane. Her heart was a frantic bird trapped within her ribs. She moved towards the door, each step a careful negotiation with the ancient floorboards. She knew the exact spot where the third board from the wall creaked, the one she had always avoided since childhood games of hide and seek. Tonight she stepped around it with practiced ease. The doorknob felt icy beneath her trembling fingers. She turned it slowly, meticulously, until the latch clicked open with a soft, almost inaudible sigh. The corridor outside was a long, dark tunnel, punctuated by rectangular pools of moonlight from the high windows. The air was colder here, carrying the faint scent of damp stone and forgotten grandeur. Eleanor pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders, its rough wool a small comfort against the creeping apprehension. She could hear nothing but the rush of blood in her own ears, the frantic thumping of her pulse. Each shadow seemed to lengthen, to twist into watchful forms. She imagined the portraits on the walls, her ancestors, their stern gazes following her, judging her flight. The feeling of being watched was almost unbearable, a prickling sensation on the back of her neck. She began her descent down the back staircase, a ghost in her own home. The carpet, thin and worn, still managed to soften the sound of her dark kid boots. She gripped the cold, smooth banister, her knuckles white. Each step was a commitment, a definitive severing of ties. Downstairs, the house felt larger, emptier, more imposing in its silent slumber. The faint scent of last night's roasting meat still lingered in the lower halls, a strange, misplaced comfort. She remembered childhood escapades, sneaking down for forbidden treats, but those were innocent games. This was real, dangerous. A distant grandfather clock chimed the half hour. 11:30. Alistair would be waiting. The thought of him, his reassuring smile, his strong hands, brought a flicker of warmth to her frozen resolve. He was her beacon, her escape. She just needed to reach him. She navigated the labyrinthine servants' passages, a part of the house she rarely frequented. These narrow utilitarian corridors were darker, less grand, smelling faintly of lye soap and coal dust. The air felt heavy, oppressive, a stark contrast to the airy main halls. Her dress brushed against the rough plaster walls, a whisper-soft sound that seemed deafening in the profound silence. She imagined a housemaid stirring, a butler rising for a midnight glass of water, any small disturbance that could shatter her fragile escape. The fear was a living thing, a cold claw gripping her throat. Finally, she reached the servants' entrance, a heavy oak door that led to the kitchen garden. It was secured by a thick iron bolt. Her hands fumbled with it, the metal cold and unyielding. It grated loudly as she slid it back, the sound echoing through the still night air. She froze, listening, her breath held captive in her lungs. Nothing, only the distant rustle of leaves outside, the chirping of crickets. The world outside the manor seemed to beckon, wild and free. She eased the door open, just a crack, peering into the inky blackness of the garden. A cool gust of wind swept in, carrying the damp scent of earth and dying roses. It felt like a cleansing breath, a release from the suffocating atmosphere of the house. She slipped through, closing the door softly behind her, cutting off her last connection to Blackwood Hall. The solid thud of the latch felt final, irreversible. The kitchen garden, usually a place of ordered rows and fragrant herbs, was a shadowy maze under the moonless sky. The gnarled branches of ancient fruit trees clawed at the darkness. Eleanor moved quickly, her eyes straining to distinguish path from bush. The ground was damp beneath her thin boots, the grass cool and wet. She could feel the dew soaking through the fine leather. A chill seeped into her bones. The sounds of the night were magnified, the buzzing of unseen insects, the distant bark of a dove, the gentle sway of branches in the breeze. Each sound was a potential threat, a signal of discovery. She found the narrow gate at the far end of the garden, rusted hinges groaning softly as she pushed it open. It led into the old apple orchard, a place of childhood memories, of laughter and sunshine. Tonight it was a place of shadows and secrets. The apple trees, laden with ripening fruit, cast grotesque figures against the sky. The scent of sweet, decaying apples was heavy in the air, a melancholic perfume. She hurried through, her eyes fixed on the darker line of the woods beyond. The woods, her destination, her salvation. She plunged into the dense canopy of ancient oaks and towering pines. The light diminished further, swallowed by the thick foliage. The air here was cooler, stiller, carrying the scent of damp earth and pine needles. Twigs snapped underfoot, each small noise a jolt to her already frayed nerves. She clutched her locket, the familiar silver a cold anchor in her palm. Her father's face, hidden within, seemed to watch her, a silent question in his painted eyes. She walked deeper, guided by instinct and the faint hope that pulsed within her. The woods felt enormous, indifferent to her plight. She imagined wild animals, unseen eyes watching her from the darkness. Her breath came in short, ragged gasps. The physical exertion, combined with the sheer terror of her situation, began to take its toll. Her legs ached, her head felt light. She stumbled over an exposed root, catching herself just before she fell. A small cry escaped her lips, quickly stifled. Then, through a break in the trees, she saw it. A dark shape, indistinct at first, then resolving into the familiar outline of a closed carriage. Relief washed over her, a dizzying wave that almost brought her to her knees. It was there. He was there. Her heart soared, a fragile bird finally taking flight. The scent of horse and leather filled the air, a sign of her escape made real. She pushed through the last tangle of undergrowth, emerging into a small clearing. The carriage stood waiting, its black paint gleaming faintly under the distant stars. Two horses, large and powerful, stamped their hooves softly, their breath pluming in the cool night air. The coachman, a figure cloaked and hooded, sat on the box, reins in hand. "Alistair," she whispered, her voice hoarse with emotion and exhaustion. She stepped forward, her eyes scanning the carriage, expecting to see his familiar form, his charming smile. She expected him to jump down, to embrace her, to tell her she was safe. But there was no movement from within the carriage. No figure emerged from the shadows around it. Only the coachman, who shifted slightly on his seat, turning his head towards her. He was not Alistair. His face was obscured by the low brim of his hat, but she could tell he was a stranger, his posture stiff, his presence radiating an unfamiliar, nervous energy. A cold dread began to coil in her stomach, tightening with each passing second. The scent of pine and damp earth suddenly felt ominous. The carriage, her promised salvation, now felt like an empty, silent trap. The carriage lurched, throwing Eleanor against the worn leather seat. Her heart hammered in her chest, echoing the thunder of horses' hooves galloping away from Blackwood Hall. The coachman, a broad man with a shadowed face, did not look at her. He grunted, a low, indistinct sound that did nothing to quell her racing thoughts. "We are not going directly to London, Lady Eleanor," he said, his voice rough and unexpected. The words startled her, severing the fragile thread of control she held. She clutched the silver locket at her throat, its cool metal a small anchor in the sudden storm of her mind. "What do you mean?" she managed, her voice thin. The carriage air was thick with damp earth and old leather. "Mr. Finch said we would go straight to the city." The coachman cleared his throat. "Change of plans, my lady. Urgent," he said. "A contact reported too many eyes in the city at this hour. He thought it best to meet at an inn just outside the main roads. The Falcon's Rest, it is called. He will be waiting there." A chill snaked up Eleanor's spine despite her shawl. Urgent, a change of plans. Alistair had been so precise, so meticulous. Every detail had been accounted for, every moment timed. This deviation, communicated through a stranger, pricked at her carefully constructed composure. She wanted to demand clarification, but the coachman faced forward, his back a rigid, unyielding wall. The carriage plunged deeper into the night. The world outside blurred to indistinct shadows. Trees once familiar now loomed like monstrous, grasping figures. The rhythmic clatter of the wheels became a hypnotic thrum, a constant reminder of her irreversible flight. Each jolt sent a tremor through her, not just physical, but emotional. She felt like a leaf torn from its branch, tossed into a gale, with no control over her direction. Her fingers tightened around the locket. Her father's face, smiling faintly from the miniature within, seemed to look upon her with a gentle sadness. What would he think of her now? Fleeing home, abandoning family, all for a love that felt increasingly fragile in the unsettling darkness. Her mother's strained face, her whispered pleas for duty, returned with a sharp pang of guilt. Had she been selfish, reckless, or simply desperate to escape Baron Ashworth's heavy gaze? She leaned her head against the carriage wall, the rough fabric scratching her cheek. The journey stretched out, a seemingly endless expanse of bumps and turns. The air grew colder, seeping through the cracks. Eleanor shivered, pulling her shawl tighter. The chill was deeper than the night air. It was a premonition, a faint whisper of doubt she tried desperately to silence. Her mind refused to be still. It raced ahead, painting vivid, hopeful pictures. Alistair, his warm smile, strong hands, his eyes crinkling when he laughed. He would be there, waiting, concern etched on his handsome face. He would pull her into his arms, his embrace chasing away the cold and the fear. They would escape together, far from the suffocating expectations of her world, far from the debts and the demands. She imagined a small cottage, perhaps by the sea. Not the grand manor she had known, but a place they would build together, brick by brick, with shared dreams and laughter. She pictured sunlight streaming through a window, illuminating Alistair bent over a book, or tending a small garden. She would be by his side, her hands busy with simple tasks, her heart light with contentment. There would be no ball gowns, no societal pressures, No endless rounds of polite conversation. Just peace. Just Alistair. Just love. The very word love felt like a balm on her raw nerves. It was the reason she had dared to defy everything, to risk scandal and ruin. Alistair had promised her a life of true affection, a union of souls, not a transaction of property. His words had been so convincing, so passionate, so utterly romantic. He had spoken of shared futures, of adventures, of a freedom she had only ever dreamed of. She clung to these memories, replaying his declarations in her mind, letting them drown out the growing unease. The carriage continued its relentless progress. The landscape outside slowly changed. Dense woods gave way to sparser trees, then open fields, and eventually the faint, distant glow of city lights. The air began to carry new smells, coal smoke, something vaguely metallic, the sharp tang of horse manure. The rhythmic clopping of hooves became interspersed with the distant rumble of other carriages, the faint shouts of unseen drivers. Eleanor pressed her face against the cold glass. The city lights were a hazy, sprawling halo on the horizon, beckoning and terrifying all at once. She had visited London with chaperones, always within the protected bubble of her social class. Now she was an outcast, a runaway, venturing into its vast, indifferent heart. Its sheer scale and the anonymity it offered were both frightening and exhilarating. She envisioned their arrival. Alistair would have arranged everything. A discreet chapel, perhaps a quiet justice of the peace. Their vows would be simple, heartfelt, binding them together irrevocably. Then they would leave, perhaps for the continent, to a place where no one knew her name, where her past could not follow. A place where she could finally be herself, Eleanor, the wife of Alistair Finch, rather than Lady Eleanor Vance, the daughter of a ruined house. A small smile touched her lips, fragile and fleeting. This future, this dream, was her beacon, guiding her through the dark. It was the only thing that kept the rising tide of fear from consuming her completely. She imagined Alistair holding her close, whispering reassurances, telling her how brave she had been, how much he adored her. She saw his eyes, blue as a summer sky, gazing at her with unwavering devotion. But then a small, insidious doubt would creep in. Why the change of plans? Why this inn, rather than their agreed-upon meeting place? Alistair was always so precise. She tried to rationalize it away. Perhaps her mother's agents were more vigilant than anticipated. Perhaps Baron Ashworth had sent out men. It made sense that Alistair would need to be cautious to protect them both. Yes, that must be it. He was being clever, resourceful, demonstrating his care for her. The carriage slowed, the grinding of wheels less hurried, the horses breathing heavily. City sounds grew clearer, more immediate. Traffic rumble, vendors' shouts, the occasional peal of laughter. They were entering London's outer fringes, a place far removed from the manicured lawns and stately halls of Blackwood. The coachman pulled the horses to a halt with a final jarring jerk. Eleanor braced herself, her heart leaping into her throat once more. This was it, the moment she had been steeling herself for what felt like an eternity. She peered out the window. The darkness remained profound, broken only by the flickering glow of a single gas lamp. The coachman dismounted, his heavy boots crunching on the gravel. He opened the carriage door. A blast of cold, damp air rushed in, carrying stale ale, smoke, and something else. Something vaguely unpleasant. Eleanor squinted, trying to make out her surroundings. Before her stood a building, large but indistinct in the dim light. Its upper stories were shrouded in shadow, but the ground floor glowed with a yellowish light that spilled from grimy windows. The sounds emanating from within were a cacophony. Rough voices raised in argument, loud bursts of laughter, the clatter of tankards, the discordant notes of a fiddle. It was a roar, a jumble of noise that assaulted her ears. The sign above the entrance swayed gently. Its painted falcon was barely discernible in the gloom. "The Falcon's Rest," it read, the letters chipped and faded. This was not the charming, discreet lodging she had imagined. This was a common inn, bustling and boisterous, a place where rough men drank and gambled. The air was thick with smoke and unfamiliar smells. It was a far cry from the romantic hideaway she had pictured, a jarring contrast to the quiet, dignified escape she had envisioned with Alistair. A sudden cold wave of disappointment washed over her. chilling her to the bone. This place felt nothing like freedom. It felt like a trap. The carriage door opened onto a clamor that seized Eleanor, silencing the quiet hum of her journey. A blast of cold night air, thick with the smell of stale ale and damp earth, swirled around her. She stepped down onto a muddy, uneven cobblestone street, the ground giving slightly beneath her thin slippers. The Falcon's Rest Inn loomed, a squat, dark building whose windows glowed with a sickly yellow light. Within, a cacophony erupted. Rough voices mingled with the clatter of tankards and the scraping of chairs. Laughter, sharp and unmelodious, pierced the air, accompanied by the low thrum of a fiddle played poorly. Eleanor felt her breath catch in her throat. This was not the charming, clandestine meeting place Alistair had painted in her mind. This was a raw, unvarnished corner of the world, devoid of comfort and grace. Her silk cloak, still damp from the carriage ride, felt like a beacon drawing unwanted attention. She clutched the Vance family locket beneath it, the cool silver a small comfort against her racing pulse. Her eyes, accustomed to the soft glow of Blackwood Hall's lamps, struggled to adjust to the smoke-laden gloom. Figures moved through the hazy light, indistinct and imposing. She saw men with unshaven faces, their clothing coarse and worn, their eyes quick to scan new arrivals. A group of them, gathered around a scarred wooden table, turned their heads as she entered, their conversation momentarily dying. A prickle of fear, sharp and cold, crawled up her spine. She felt utterly exposed, a delicate bird dropped into a nest of wolves. Her noble upbringing, her refined manners, all felt useless here, a vulnerability rather than a shield. Where was Alistair? He should have been waiting, ready to sweep her away from this jarring scene. Her gaze darted through the crowd, searching for his familiar, reassuring face. Each passing moment without seeing him added another thread to the growing tangle of anxiety in her stomach. The innkeeper, a man with a washed red face and a stained apron, emerged from behind a counter. His eyes, small and shrewd, took in Eleanor's fine, if travel-worn clothes. "Looking for someone, miss." His voice was a gravelly rumble that seemed to vibrate through the floorboards. He wiped his hands on his apron, leaving a streak of grime. Eleanor's tongue felt thick and dry. I am expected. By Mr. Finch." Her voice, though low, sounded startlingly clear and out of place in the din. The simple words felt like a declaration of her naive hopes. The innkeeper's lips twitched, almost a smile, but it held no warmth. "Ah, Mr. Finch. Yes, he spoke of a lady. Said he'd be along shortly. Had a matter to attend to first, he did." He motioned with his chin towards a narrow, unlit staircase tucked away in a corner. "Said you were to wait upstairs, room 3, at the end of the hall." He paused, then added, "Paid for, of course. All taken care of." A matter to attend to? A cold wave washed over Eleanor. This was not the plan. Alistair was supposed to be here to greet her, to reassure her. The coachman's vague words about a change of plans now echoed with a chilling new resonance. She had pictured a tender reunion, a whispered apology for the delay, a shared glance of conspiratorial excitement. Instead, she was being directed to a solitary room, left alone in this unsettling place. Her initial hope, though still flickering, began to dim, shrouded by a fog of suspicion. "Come along then," the innkeeper urged, turning and lumbering towards the staircase. "No sense standing down here. More respectable upstairs." Respectable. The word felt like a hollow mockery in this setting. Eleanor hesitated, her instincts screaming at her to flee, to run back into the uncertain night. But where would she go? Her family, her home, her reputation, all were now irrevocably tied to this desperate gamble. She had burned her bridges. With a heavy heart, she gathered her cloak tighter around her shoulders and followed the innkeeper up the creaking stairs. Each step ascended into deeper shadows, leaving the bustling common room further behind, but not the unsettling sounds. The hallway upstairs was even dimmer, lit only by a single flickering oil lamp that cast long, dancing shadows. The air grew colder, carrying a faint, musty smell, unlike the comforting scent of old wood and lavender at Blackwood Hall. The floorboards groaned under their weight, each sound amplified in the oppressive quiet. Eleanor felt a tremor pass through her. Her hands, clasped tightly together, grew cold and slightly clammy. This journey was not the grand adventure she had envisioned. It was a descent into an unknown, disquieting world. The innkeeper stopped before a door at the very end of the corridor. Room 3, he announced, his voice echoing in the confined space. He pushed the door open, revealing a small, sparsely furnished chamber. A narrow bed, its mattress lumpy and covered with a thin, faded blanket, occupied one wall. A rickety wooden chair stood beside a small, smudged window. The fireplace was cold, its grate empty. A single half-burnt candle on a small table provided the only light, casting long shadows that distorted the already humble furniture. The air hung heavy with a stale, damp odor. "He won't be long," the innkeeper repeated, perhaps sensing her apprehension. "Make yourself comfortable." He nodded curtly, then turned and lumbered back down the stairs, leaving Eleanor alone in the silence. The distant sounds of the common room now seemed muffled, separated from her by layers of wood and plaster. Eleanor slowly entered the room, her gaze sweeping over its meager contents. It was stark, cold, and utterly devoid of anything personal or welcoming. She had imagined a cozy room, perhaps with a fire burning, a tray of tea, a sense of anticipation for a new beginning. Instead, this felt like a temporary holding cell, a place of transit rather than a destination. Her heart, which had been beating with a nervous rhythm since her departure, now began to pound with a heavier, more insistent drum. She walked to the window, peering through the grimy pane. Outside, the night was a vast, inky canvas, broken only by the dim, scattered lights of London. The gas lamps in the street below cast pools of feeble illumination, revealing nothing but the deserted street and the occasional hurried figure. Her elegant gown, designed for a life of comfort and social engagements, felt ridiculously out of place. A costume for a play she no longer wished to perform. Eleanor pulled the chair closer to the window and sank into it, her muscles aching from the long, anxious journey. She clasped her locket again, turning it over and over in her fingers. The silver, once a source of strength, now felt like a cold, hard reminder of the family she had abandoned, the honor she had risked. A tear, hot and unwelcome, traced a path down her cheek. She quickly brushed it away, her pride refusing to let despair take root just yet. Alistair would come. He had to. He loved her. He had promised. Minutes bled into what felt like hours. The candle on the table slowly dwindled, its flame dancing precariously, casting increasingly longer and more unsettling shadows. Every creak of the floorboards outside, every distant cough, made her jump, her head snapping toward the door. She strained her ears, listening for his footsteps, for his familiar voice. Each time it was nothing. Just the silence of the corridor, the faint drone of the inn below, or the whisper of the wind outside. Her initial hope, tenacious as it was, began to fray at the edges. The romantic vision of her elopement, once so vivid, started to blur, replaced by a growing canvas of doubt. Was this Alistair's idea of discretion, or something more sinister? He had always been so charming, so attentive, his words like warm honey, but those words now seemed thin, almost transparent in the harsh light of this desolate room. She remembered his ardent declarations of love, his promises of a life free from the Baron's clutches. Those memories felt increasingly distant, like echoes from another lifetime. Elisen rose from the chair and began to pace the small room, her steps light and restless. One step, 2 steps, turn. Her mind raced, replaying every conversation, every stolen glance. Had there been a sign, a hint of his true intentions? She tried to dismiss the rising tide of fear. He was merely delayed, perhaps making arrangements for their journey beyond London. He was protecting her, ensuring their safety. She repeated these reassurances to herself, but they felt hollow, like pretty lies she was trying to believe. The chill in the room seemed to deepen, seeping into her bones despite her cloak. She hugged herself, trying to ward off the growing sense of dread. The silence of the room, once merely unnerving, now felt heavy, pressing down on her, amplifying her isolation. She was alone, in a strange, uninviting place, waiting for a man whose actions were becoming increasingly incongruous with his promises. Her throat tightened. A profound ache settled in her chest, a mixture of fear, confusion, and a burgeoning sense of betrayal. What if he did not come? What then? The thought, once unthinkable, now hammered at the edges of her consciousness. She had sacrificed everything for him. Her family, her reputation, her future, all gone, all risked on the word of a man who was now conspicuously absent. A single, unbidden tear escaped her eye, and this time she made no effort to stop it. It was quickly followed by another, and then another, a silent cascade of despair. She sank back onto the edge of the bed, her hands gripping the locket so tightly her knuckles whitened. The cheap, coarse fabric of the blanket scratched against her fingers. The scent of dust and damp wood filled her nostrils. She closed her eyes, trying to block out the reality of her surroundings, to conjure Alistair's face, his smile, his kind eyes. But the image was fading, replaced by the grim reality of this inn, this room, this terrifying solitude. The candle on the table flickered one last time, then sputtered out, plunging the room into near total darkness. Only a faint sliver of moonlight, struggling through the grimy window, offered a ghostly illumination. Eleanor gasped, her breath catching. The sudden darkness amplified every other sensation. The cold, the silence, the crushing weight of her fear. She felt utterly lost, adrift in a sea of her own making. Then, from the adjacent room, a sound. It was faint at first, a low murmur of voices, indistinct and muffled. Eleanor froze, her head cocked, listening intently. Her heart gave a sudden, painful lurch. It was not the innkeeper. It was not the distant clamor of the common room. This was closer, directly next to her. Her mind, already stretched thin with anxiety, tried to dismiss it as nothing. Just other guests, perhaps. But then a voice rose slightly above the other, clearer now, cutting through the thin wall that separated their rooms. It was a voice she knew intimately, a voice that had whispered words of love and promises of forever, a voice that now, for some reason, sent a wave of icy dread washing over her. A chill, colder than the night air, colder than the damp room, ran down her spine. It was Alistair's voice. The carriage door opened onto a clamor that seized Eleanor, silencing the quiet hum of her journey. A blast of cold night air, thick with the smell of stale ale and damp earth, swirled around her. She stepped down onto a muddy, uneven cobblestone street, the ground giving slightly beneath her thin slippers. The Falcon's Rest Inn loomed, a squat, dark building whose windows glowed with a sickly yellow light. Within, a cacophony erupted. Rough voices mingled with the clatter of tankards and the scraping of chairs. Laughter, sharp and unmelodious, pierced the air, accompanied by the low thrum of a fiddle played poorly. Eleanor felt her breath catch in her throat. This was not the charming, clandestine meeting place Alistair had painted in her mind. This was a raw, unvarnished corner of the world, devoid of comfort and grace. Her silk cloak, still damp from the carriage ride, felt like a beacon drawing unwanted attention. She clutched the Vance family locket beneath it, the cool silver a small comfort against her racing pulse. Her eyes, accustomed to the soft glow of Blackwood Hall's lamps, struggled to adjust to the smoke-laden gloom. Figures moved through the hazy light, indistinct and imposing. She saw men with unshaven faces, their clothing coarse and worn, their eyes quick to scan new arrivals. A group of them, gathered around a scarred wooden table, turned their heads as she entered, their conversation momentarily dying. A prickle of fear, sharp and cold, crawled up her spine. She felt utterly exposed, a delicate bird dropped into a nest of wolves. Her noble upbringing, her refined manners, all felt useless here, a vulnerability rather than a shield. Where was Alistair? He should have been waiting, ready to sweep her away from this jarring scene. Her gaze darted through the crowd, searching for his familiar, reassuring face. Each passing moment without seeing him added another thread to the growing tangle of anxiety in her stomach. The innkeeper, a man with a wide, red face and a stained apron, emerged from behind a counter. His eyes, small and shrewd, took in Eleanor's fine, if travel-worn, clothes. "Looking for someone, miss?" His voice was a gravelly rumble that seemed to vibrate through the floorboards. He wiped his hands on his apron, leaving a streak of grime. Eleanor's tongue felt thick and dry. I am expected. By Mr. Finch." Her voice, though low, sounded startlingly clear and out of place in the din. The simple words felt like a declaration of her naive hopes. The innkeeper's lips twitched, almost a smile, but it held no warmth. Ah, Mr. Finch. Yes, he spoke of a lady, said he'd be along shortly. Had a matter to attend to first? He did. He motioned with his chin towards a narrow, unlit staircase tucked away in a corner. Said you were to wait upstairs, room 3, at the end of the hall. He paused, then added, paid for, of course. All taken care of. A matter to attend to? A cold wave washed over Eleanor. This was not the plan. Alistair was supposed to be here to greet her, to reassure her. The coachman's vague words about a change of plans now echoed with a chilling new resonance. She had pictured a tender reunion, a whispered apology for the delay, a shared glance of conspiratorial excitement. Instead, she was being directed to a solitary room, left alone in this unsettling place. Her initial hope, though still flickering, began to dim, shrouded by a fog of suspicion. Come along then, the innkeeper urged, turning and lumbering towards the staircase. No sense standing down here. More respectable, upstairs. Respectable. The word felt like a hollow mockery in this setting. Eleanor hesitated, her instincts screaming at her to flee, to run back into the uncertain night. But where would she go? Her family, her home, her reputation, all were now irrevocably tied to this desperate gamble. She had burned her bridges. With a heavy heart, she gathered her cloak tighter around her shoulders and followed the innkeeper up the creaking stairs. Each step ascended into deeper shadows, leaving the bustling common room further behind, but not the unsettling sounds. The hallway upstairs was even dimmer, lit only by a single flickering oil lamp that cast long, dancing shadows. The air grew colder, carrying a faint, musty smell, unlike the comforting scent of old wood and lavender at Blackwood Hall. The floorboards groaned under their weight, each sound amplified in the oppressive quiet. Eleanor felt a tremor pass through her. Her hands, clasped tightly together, grew cold and slightly clammy. This journey was not the grand adventure she had envisioned. It was a descent into an unknown, disquieting world. The innkeeper stopped before a door at the very end of the corridor. Room 3, he announced, his voice echoing in the confined space. He pushed the door open, revealing a small, sparsely furnished chamber. A narrow bed, its mattress lumpy and covered with a thin, faded blanket, occupied one wall. A rickety wooden chair stood beside a small, smudged window. The fireplace was cold, its grate empty. A single half-burnt candle on a small table provided the only light, casting long shadows that distorted the already humble furniture. The air hung heavy with a stale, damp odor. He won't be long, the innkeeper repeated, perhaps sensing her apprehension. Make yourself comfortable. He nodded curtly, then turned and lumbered back down the stairs, leaving Eleanor alone in the silence. The distant sounds of the common room now seemed muffled, separated from her by layers of wood and plaster. Eleanor slowly entered the room, her gaze sweeping over its meager contents. It was stark, cold, and utterly devoid of anything personal or welcoming. She had imagined a cozy room, perhaps with a fire burning, a tray of tea, a sense of anticipation for a new beginning. Instead, this felt like a temporary holding cell, a place of transit rather than a destination. Her heart, which had been beating with a nervous rhythm since her departure, now began to pound with a heavier, more insistent drum. She walked to the window, peering through the grimy pane. Outside, the night was a vast, inky canvas, broken only by the dim, scattered lights of London. The gas lamps in the street below cast pools of feeble illumination, revealing nothing but the deserted street and the occasional hurried figure. Her elegant gown, designed for a life of comfort and social engagements, felt ridiculously out of place, a costume for a play she no longer wished to perform. Eleanor pulled the chair closer to the window and sank into it, her muscles aching from the long, anxious journey. She clasped her locket again, turning it over and over in her fingers. The silver, once a source of strength, now felt like a cold, hard reminder of the family she had abandoned, the honor she had risked. A tear, hot and unwelcome, traced a path down her cheek. She quickly brushed it away, her pride refusing to let despair take root just yet. Alistair would come. He had to. He loved her. He had promised. Minutes bled into what felt like hours. The candle on the table slowly dwindled, its flame dancing precariously, casting increasingly longer and more unsettling shadows. Every creak of the floorboards outside, every distant cough made her jump, her head snapping towards the door. She strained her ears, listening for his footsteps, for his familiar voice. Each time, it was nothing, just the silence of the corridor, the faint drone of the inn below, or the whisper of the wind outside. Her initial hope, tenacious as it was, began to fray at the edges. The romantic vision of her elopement, once so vivid, started to blur, replaced by a growing canvas of doubt. Was this Alistair's idea of discretion, or something more sinister? He had always been so charming, so attentive, his words like warm honey. But those words now seemed thin, almost transparent, in the harsh light of this desolate room. She remembered his ardent declarations of love, his promises of a life free from the Baron's clutches. Those memories felt increasingly distant, like echoes from another lifetime. Eleanor rose from the chair and began to pace the small room, her steps light and restless. One step, two steps, turn. Her mind raced, replaying every conversation, every stolen glance. Had there been a sign, a hint of his true intentions? She tried to dismiss the rising tide of fear. He was merely delayed, perhaps making arrangements for their journey beyond London. He was protecting her, ensuring their safety. She repeated these reassurances to herself, but they felt hollow, like pretty lies she was trying to believe. The chill in the room seemed to deepen, seeping into her bones despite her cloak. She hugged herself, trying to ward off the growing sense of dread. The silence of the room, once merely unnerving, now felt heavy, pressing down on her, amplifying her isolation. She was alone in a strange, uninviting place, waiting for a man whose actions were becoming increasingly incongruous with his promises. Her throat tightened, a profound ache settled in her chest, a mixture of fear, confusion, and a burgeoning sense of betrayal. What if he did not come? What then? The thought, once unthinkable, now hammered at the edges of her consciousness. She had sacrificed everything for him, her family, her reputation, her future, all gone, all risked on the word of a man who was now conspicuously absent. A single, unbidden tear escaped her eye, and this time she made no effort to stop it. It was quickly followed by another, and then another, a silent cascade of despair. She sank back onto the edge of the bed, her hands gripping the locket so tightly her knuckles whitened. The cheap, coarse fabric of the blanket scratched against her fingers. The scent of dust and damp wood filled her nostrils. She closed her eyes, trying to block out the reality of her surroundings, to conjure Alistair's face, his smile, his kind eyes. But the image was fading, replaced by the grim reality of this inn, this room, this terrifying solitude. The candle on the table flickered one last time, then sputtered out, plunging the room into near-total darkness. Only a faint sliver of moonlight, struggling through the grimy window, offered a ghostly illumination. Eleanor gasped, her breath catching. The sudden darkness amplified every other sensation. The cold, the silence, the crushing weight of her fear. She felt utterly lost, adrift in a sea of her own making. Then, from the adjacent room, a sound. It was faint at first, a low murmur of voices, indistinct and muffled. Eleanor froze, her head cocked, listening intently. Her heart gave a sudden, painful lurch. It was not the innkeeper. It was not the distant clamor of the common room. This was closer, directly next to her. Her mind, already stretched thin with anxiety, tried to dismiss it as nothing. Just other guests, perhaps. But then, a voice rose slightly above the other, clearer now, cutting through the thin wall that separated their rooms. It was a voice she knew intimately, a voice that had whispered words of love and promises of forever. A voice that now, for some reason, sent a wave of icy dread washing over her. A chill, colder than the night air, colder than the damp room, ran down her spine. It was Alistair's voice. A whisper of muffled voices, low and indistinct at first, reached Eleanor through the thin wall. She stopped breathing, her muscles tensing without conscious command. A moment ago, the room's silence had been a comfort, a brief respite from the inn's clamor downstairs. Now that same silence amplified the unseen conversation next door, pulling her focus with an unnerving magnetism. She edged closer to the wall, her ears straining, pressing against the rough plaster as if to meld with it, to draw the words directly into her mind. The air in the small room felt suddenly cold, seeping through her thin traveling cloak, despite the faint warmth from the dwindling fire in the hearth. A shiver traced its way down her spine, unrelated to the temperature. Her heart began a frantic, insistent rhythm against her ribs, a drumbeat of rising anxiety. A familiar cadence, a certain timbre to one of the voices, sent a jolt of recognition through her. It was Alistair. His voice, usually so smooth and melodic when speaking to her, now held an unfamiliar edge, a sharp, calculating tone she had never heard before. "The Vance dowry," she heard him say, the words cutting through the flimsy partition with chilling clarity. "It is meager indeed." Eleanor's blood ran cold. The phrase meager dowry echoed in the small space, bouncing off the walls of her mind. Her brow furrowed in confusion, then in a growing sense of dread. Why would Alistair be discussing her dowry, and in such a dismissive manner? Her fingers locked around the locket at her throat, the cool metal a sudden anchor in her swirling thoughts. This was not the charming, ardent Alistair who had sworn undying love beneath the pale moonlight. This voice was detached, almost disdainful, devoid of any warmth or affection. Another voice, gruffer and unknown, responded. Its words were less distinct, lost to the inn's general hum, but Alistair's reply followed swiftly, leaving no room for doubt. "Barely enough to cover my debts, let alone establish the life I envisioned," he stated, a sigh of exasperation heavy in his tone. "Her family is thoroughly ruined, you see. A complete and utter disgrace." The words struck Eleanor like physical blows. Disgrace, ruined, her family. These were not the pronouncements of a devoted lover planning a life together. These were the cold, hard calculations of a merchant assessing a failing investment. Her breath hitched in her throat, a burning sensation clawing at her windpipe. She tried to swallow, but her mouth had gone dry, tasting faintly of dust and fear. A prickle of tears began to form behind her eyes, unbidden, unwanted. She squeezed them shut for a moment, wishing the words away, wishing herself anywhere but in this small, stifling room. "But the old man's offer," the other voice murmured, more clearly this time. "Baron Ashworth's settlement was substantial, or so I hear." Alistair chuckled, a low, unpleasant sound that scraped across Eleanor's nerves. It was a sound utterly devoid of joy, laced instead with a cynical, mocking edge. Indeed, a rather desperate sum for a rather desperate bride. But why let it fall into Ashworth's coffers when a portion could be diverted? Eleanor felt a wave of nausea wash over her. Her stomach churned violently, threatening to betray her. She gripped the wall, her knuckles white, her body trembling uncontrollably. Diverted, he spoke of her dowry, her future, her very existence, as if it were a common purse to be plundered and distributed at his whim. The romantic dream she had so carefully nurtured, the whispered promises under the Blackwood Hall arches, twisted into grotesque caricatures in her mind. Each sweet memory now felt like a cruel deception. "The plan remains unchanged, then?" the accomplice asked. "Precisely," Alistair confirmed, his voice regaining a measure of its usual confidence, a confidence that now sounded utterly chilling. "She will be quite distraught when she finds herself abandoned, of course, but her desperation will be my leverage. Once I secure the immediate funds, the rest is simple. A tearful letter, a convenient disappearance, and she will be forced back to her family, or worse, to the Baron." The air left Eleanor's lungs in a silent, agonizing gasp. Her knees buckled beneath her, and she slid down the wall, collapsing onto the rough floorboards. The sudden impact sent a jolt through her, but she barely registered the pain. Her world, which had been so carefully constructed on foundations of love and hope, now shattered into a million irreparable pieces around her. The cruel truth, delivered with such cold, detached calculation, was a physical agony sharper than any blade. Abandoned, forced back. Her mind reeled, trying to reconcile the image of the passionate, devoted Alistair with the monstrous stranger whose voice now pierced her heart. He had never loved her. The thought reverberated through her being, leaving her hollow and cold. It was a game a calculated deception. Every tender word, every longing gaze, every illicit touch had been a lie. A carefully orchestrated performance to lure her into his trap. Tears, hot and stinging, finally breached her eyelids, tracing paths down her dust-streaked cheeks. She tasted their saltiness, mingling with the metallic tang of despair. Her vision blurred, the dimly lit room spinning around her. She squeezed her eyes shut again, but the darkness offered no solace, only a deeper, more profound sense of entrapment. Her hands flew to her mouth, stifling a sob that threatened to escape, to reveal her presence, to confirm her utter humiliation. The overheard words played again and again in her mind, a relentless, torturous loop. Meager dowry, thoroughly ruined. Desperate bride, my leverage. Each phrase was a fresh stab, twisting the knife in her heart. She remembered her father's warnings about wolves in sheep's clothing, about men who saw only advantage. She had dismissed them, so certain that Alistair was different, that their love was pure. Oh, how foolish, how impossibly naive she had been. A profound sense of betrayal, so raw and potent, surged through her, mingling with a burning humiliation. She had risked everything for him, her family's honor, her own reputation, her future. She had defied her mother, abandoned her home, fled into the perilous night, all for a man who saw her as nothing more than a bargaining chip, a means to settle his sordid debts. The thought was unbearable, a weight that threatened to crush her spirit entirely. Her body began to shake violently, a deep tremor originating from her core and radiating outwards. She clutched at her chest, as if to hold her breaking heart together, to contain the agonizing pain. Her throat constricted, making it almost impossible to draw a proper breath. Each attempt was shallow, ragged, and inadequate. She felt a desperate urge to scream, to rail against the injustice, to unleash the torrent of anguish building inside her, but no sound escaped her lips. The rough texture of the floorboards beneath her hands, the faint smell of stale ale and smoke from the inn below, the distant clatter of dishes and the rumble of carriage wheels outside, all these sensory details registered dimly through a thick fog of shock and agony. They were distant, irrelevant, compared to the cataclysm unfolding within her. She was adrift, lost in an ocean of despair, with no compass, no shore in sight. She thought of Baron Ashworth, the man she had so desperately tried to escape. His possessive gaze, his booming voice, his corpulent form. She had viewed him as a monster, a fate worse than death. But Alistair, her beloved Alistair, had proven to be a far more insidious monster, one who wore a mask of affection, only to reveal a soul of ice and calculation. Ashworth, at least, was honest in his avarice. Alistair was a viper in the grass, charming and beautiful, but deadly. The conversation next door continued, but the words became a meaningless drone, a background hum, against the cacophony of her own internal suffering. Her mind refused to process any more of his cold, pragmatic pronouncements. It was too much. The sheer weight of his treachery was suffocating her, stealing her will to breathe, to exist. She pressed her forehead against the wall, seeking some anchor, some point of stability in her collapsing world. What would become of her now? She had no money, no home, no family to return to. Her mother would never forgive her for running away, for disgracing the Vance name further. She would be an outcast, utterly ruined, forced to face Ashworth with nothing but shame and despair. The image of her future stretched before her, bleak and barren, a desolate landscape devoid of any light or hope. A faint clink of coins, followed by Alistair's satisfied sigh, reached her ears. Then the sound of footsteps. They grew louder, closer, moving towards her room. Her heart leaped into her throat, choking her. He was coming. He was coming to face her, to pretend, to offer more lies. A wave of icy terror washed over the fiery pain of betrayal. She wanted to flee, to hide, to vanish into thin air, but her limbs felt heavy, unresponsive, rooted to the spot by the sheer force of her shock. The doorknob turned. A soft, familiar creak filled the silence of her room, pulling her gaze upward, dragging her from the depths of her despair. Eleanor slowly lifted her head, her eyes wide, raw and stinging. Her face was streaked with tears, her raven hair disheveled. her delicate features contorted by a pain so profound it had aged her by years in mere moments. The door swung open, revealing Alistair standing in the doorway. A charming, practiced smile played on his lips, designed to reassure, to disarm. He stepped into the room, his eyes alight with a false cheer, completely unaware of the cataclysm he had just unleashed. Eleanor stared at him, her gray eyes no longer filled with love or hope, but with a dawning horror that reflected the full, terrible magnitude of his monstrous deceit. The faint sound of revelry from downstairs seemed to mock Eleanor. Alistair stood before her, his smile fixed, his blue eyes holding a predatory gleam she had never noticed until now. He looked like the charming man she thought she loved, yet his very presence now felt like a venomous insult. Her throat tightened, and the air grew impossibly thin. A cold dread seeped into her bones, chilling her far more deeply than any night air. Alistair. Her voice was barely a whisper, a ragged sound she hardly recognized as her own. She swallowed hard, trying to quell the tremor that shook her entire frame. What exactly were you discussing with your friend in the next room? Her gaze was unwavering, fixed on his face, watching for any flicker of deceit. She longed for him to deny it, to somehow explain away the words that had shattered her world. Alistair's smile faltered, a slight, almost imperceptible shift, his brow furrowed in a show of mild concern. My dear, whatever do you mean? I was merely discussing travel arrangements. The journey is long, and I wish to ensure your comfort. His voice was smooth, practiced, a balm designed to soothe, but to Eleanor it now sounded like a snake's hiss. The scent of his expensive cologne, once comforting, now felt cloying, suffocating. Do not lie to me, she commanded, her voice gaining strength, though it still trembled with the effort. Her fingers clenched into fists, digging crescent moons into her palms. I heard you, every word, about my meager dowry and how you would abandon me once you had secured what little remained. The words tasted like ash in her mouth. The blood pounded in her ears, a furious drumbeat echoing her rage. His composure cracked then, a swift, ugly change. The charming mask slipped away, revealing a cold, calculating anger underneath. His eyes narrowed, losing all pretense of affection. You were eavesdropping, he scoffed, a sneer twisting his handsome features. How utterly unladylike of you, Eleanor. Perhaps that is why you always seem so inconvenient. He took a step closer, his presence suddenly menacing. Eleanor recoiled, a gasp catching in her throat. His words were like physical blows, each one striking at the last vestiges of her hope. Inconvenient, she repeated, her voice rising to a raw, wounded cry. I was inconvenient? I risked everything for you, my family, my home, my honor, and all for your mercenary schemes. Hot tears, sharp and bitter, began to stream down her face, blurring her vision. She tasted the salt of them on her lips. Alistair threw his hands up in a dismissive gesture. And whose fault is that, my dear? Your family's foolish pride left them destitute. Your mother was practically begging me to take you off her hands, even offering a paltry sum to sweeten the deal. Did you truly believe I, a man of my standing, would be content with such a meager offering? His voice dripped with contempt, his words twisting the truth into a grotesque caricature. His callousness ignited a fire within her, a furious blaze that momentarily eclipsed the pain. My mother has her flaws, Eleanor retorted, her voice shaking with barely suppressed fury. But she would never offer me to a snake like you. You lied to me. You preyed on my desperation. You spoke of love, of a future, and all the while you saw only an opportunity. Her chest ached with the force of her indignation. Love? He scoffed again, a harsh, humorless sound. That is a luxury for those who can afford it, Eleanor. Your family is ruined. You are ruined. I was doing you a favor, offering you a name, a pretense of respectability, however brief. He stepped back, a flicker of something that looked like self-preservation in his eyes. But clearly you are too dramatic, too emotional to understand the practicalities of our world. His blatant disregard, his cruel dismissal of everything she held dear, solidified her resolve. The man before her was a stranger, a monstrous distortion of the man she had loved. There was no appealing to his conscience, no reaching the heart she now knew he did not possess. Her fingers tightened on the small silver locket nestled against her skin, the only true comfort she had left. "You are a coward, Alastair Finch," she stated, her voice surprisingly steady now, ringing with a cold, clear finality. All traces of softness had vanished from her expression, replaced by a steely resolve. "And a cad. I would rather face the Baron and all his vulgarity than spend another moment in your deceitful presence." Her heart felt like a block of ice, cold and heavy within her. She could feel the chill spreading through her limbs. He spluttered, momentarily taken aback by her sudden defiance. "Eleanor, wait, you are being irrational. Where will you go? You have nowhere, no money, no protection. Do you think a lady such as yourself can survive alone in London? You would be utterly lost." His voice held a note of warning, perhaps even a twisted form of concern, but it came too late. "Lost?" she echoed, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. It was a sound devoid of mirth, brittle and hollow. "I was lost the moment I believed your lies, but no longer." She felt a surge of adrenaline, a desperate need to escape the suffocating confines of the small room and the poisonous aura of his presence. The stale air felt thick, making it hard to breathe. Without another word, without a backward glance, Eleanor turned and fled. She wrenched open the door, ignoring the shocked expression on Alistair's face. The clatter and noise of the inn's common room assaulted her ears, a chaotic symphony of rough voices, clinking tankards, and raucous laughter. She barely registered the curious stares of the patrons as she stumbled through their midst. The smell of ale and roasting meat, once simply unpleasant, now felt like a foul stench in her nostrils. She pushed past a burly man who grumbled something unintelligible and darted towards the entrance. The cool night air hit her face like a slap, a welcome shock after the oppressive heat of the inn. Her breath hitched in her throat, a desperate sob rising but refusing to break free. She did not know where she was going, only that she had to be away from him, away from the devastating wreckage of her dreams. Her thin shoes offered little protection from the rough cobbles as she ran. The streets of London were a bewildering maze, a stark contrast to the familiar, manicured paths of Blackwood Hall. Gas lamps cast pools of dim, flickering light, creating long dancing shadows that seemed to mock her desperate flight. Carriages rattled past, their wheels kicking up mud and grime. Street vendors hawked their wares, their cries echoing in the night. The air was thick with the smell of coal smoke, damp earth, and something vaguely metallic. She hugged her arms around herself, but the cold wind pierced through her worn gown. Eleanor walked aimlessly, her mind a whirling vortex of pain and disbelief. Each step was an effort, her legs feeling heavy and leaden. The image of Alistair's sneering face was seared into her memory, replacing the tender glances and whispered promises she had cherished. The man she had loved, the future she had envisioned, had been nothing more than a cruel illusion. Her heart felt hollowed out, an empty space where hope once resided. The tears continued to fall, a silent, endless river tracing paths down her cheeks, mingling with the soot and grime of the city. She felt utterly exposed, a lady of refinement cast adrift in a world she did not understand, a world that seemed indifferent to her suffering. The bustling crowds paid her no mind, rushing past like specters, each absorbed in their own nocturnal pursuits. She was just another lost soul in a city teeming with millions. Her vision blurred, not just from tears, but from the sheer exhaustion that began to weigh her down. Her head throbbed, a dull, persistent ache behind her eyes. The cold seeped into her very bones, a chill that mirrored the desolation in her soul. She clutched the locket, her deceased father's miniature portrait, a tangible link to a past that now felt impossibly distant, a world that no longer existed for her. She had nowhere to go. Blackwood Hall was closed to her, its gates now symbolic of the life she had forfeited. Her mother would be furious, perhaps even relieved that her burden had seemingly vanished. Baron Ashworth, the very man she had tried to escape, now seemed an inevitable, horrifying fate. But how could she return, disgraced and alone? The thought was unbearable, a fresh wave of nausea washing over her. The constant rumble of carriage wheels and the shouts of unseen figures grated on her nerves. Her carefully pinned hair had come loose, strands whipping around her face in the cold wind. Her delicate slippers were soaked and caked with mud, offering no resistance to the harsh reality beneath her feet. The polished world of drawing rooms and polite society felt like a forgotten dream, replaced by this grim, unforgiving labyrinth of brick and cobblestone. She felt a sudden, sharp pain as her foot caught on something. A loose cobblestone, uneven and treacherous, rose abruptly from the otherwise flat path. Her tired body, already pushed to its limits, offered no resistance. Her legs buckled beneath her. With a choked cry, Eleanor tumbled forward, her hands instinctively reaching out but finding no purchase. She landed hard, her knees striking the cold, unforgiving mud of the street. The shock of the impact jarred her entire frame. Her breath left her in a rush. She lay there for a moment gasping. The physical pain, almost a welcome distraction from the profound agony in her heart. Her locket, her only constant, was clutched tight in her trembling hand, pressed against her chest as if to protect the broken pieces of her soul. The slick cobblestones bit into Eleanor's knees, cold and unforgiving through the thin fabric of her gown. Her hands, stained with mud from her fall, tightened around the tarnished silver locket. A raw sob tore from her throat, tasting like ash in the metallic tang of tears. The world had shrunk to this small, damp patch of ground, surrounded by the indifferent roar of London. Each shuddering breath was a struggle against the overwhelming pressure in her chest, a physical weight of despair. She had been Lady Eleanor Vance, daughter of a proud, if impoverished, noble house. Now she was a discarded thing, a bird with broken wings lying in the filth of a public street. The shame of it burned hotter than the biting wind that whipped around her. Her honor, once her most guarded possession, felt irrevocably stained, like a beautiful tapestry torn to shreds and trampled underfoot. She thought of her father, his stern yet loving face peering from the locket, and another wave of grief washed over her. He had spoken of dignity, of keeping the Vance name untarnished. What would he say if he saw her now? The dreams she had nursed, the whispered promises Alistair had woven like delicate lace, lay shattered around her. She had believed him, believed in his passionate declarations, his earnest blue eyes. Every tender touch, every stolen kiss now felt like a cruel mockery, a prelude to this agonizing betrayal. His words, cold and calculating, echoed in her mind. Her meager dowry. Abandon her once he secures her remaining funds. They were daggers twisting in the raw wound of her heart. How could she have been so foolish, so blind to the serpent hiding behind his charming smile? The innocence she had clung to, even in the face of her mother's pragmatic lessons, had vanished, leaving behind a bitter, empty space. Her clothes were damp, clinging uncomfortably to her skin. The cold seeped into her bones, a constant ache that matched the hollowness inside her own. She could feel the uneven texture of the street beneath her, the rough grit of London's forgotten dust. The air carried the smells of coal smoke, stale ale, and something unidentifiable yet vaguely unpleasant, a sharp contrast to the familiar scent of old lavender and polished wood that permeated Blackwood Hall. The faint taste of her own tears was a constant reminder of her degradation. She lifted a trembling hand to her face, wiping away the endless flow of salty water. But her eyes remained blurry, her vision clouded by sorrow. The sounds of the street, once a distant cacophony, now pressed in on her, a symphony of strangers' lives that had no place for her. The rumble of carriage wheels, the distant cries of vendors, the hurried footsteps of passers-by, all seemed to mock her stillness, her brokenness. Each sound emphasized her isolation, her complete removal from the world she knew. A sudden terrifying thought pierced through her despair. She had nowhere to go. Blackwood Hall, her ancestral home, was no longer a refuge. To return meant facing the wrath of her mother, Lady Beatrice, who would see only the disgrace, the broken engagement to Baron Ashworth, the squandered opportunity to save their name. She would be a burden, a living testament to failure, her honor utterly compromised. The thought of Baron Ashworth, his possessive gaze and booming voice, now filled her with a profound nausea. His offer, once a horrifying fate, was now an impossible one. She had fled her prison only to find herself adrift in a far more terrifying wilderness. She remembered her father's words about the Vance legacy, the honor that must be upheld at all costs. She had tried in her own naive way to uphold it by choosing what she believed was love, by attempting to escape a loveless marriage. But Alistair's treachery had not only destroyed her personal dreams, it had annihilated her ability to return to her former life with any semblance of respectability. She was no longer marriageable in the eyes of society, no longer worthy of her name. The shame would cling to her like a shroud, a constant whisper of her foolishness and ruination. Her mother's face, etched with worry and ambition, flashed before her eyes. Lady Beatrice had always been distant, her affection conditional, tied to Eleanor's performance as a noble daughter. Eleanor knew her mother would not offer comfort, only recrimination. There was no solace to be found in the familiar corridors of Blackwood Hall, only deeper shame. She was in exile, self-imposed yet utterly justified by the circumstances. The choice felt taken from her fear, replaced by a brutal reality. No family to return to, no one left to turn to. The words resonated in her mind, a cold, hard truth. Her father was gone. Her mother would disown her. Alistair, the man she had loved, had proven himself a viper. She was 22 years old, accustomed to a life of privilege and protection, and now she possessed nothing but the tattered remnants of her dignity and the locket clutched in her hand. The cold, impersonal brick walls of the buildings around her seemed to stare down, unyielding and indifferent. A cart rumbled past, its wheels splashing muddy water near her feet. She flinched, pulling her legs closer, trying to make herself smaller, less visible. The sheer scale of the city, its endless stream of bustling humanity, made her feel insignificant, a speck of dust in a vast, indifferent machine. People hurried by, their faces obscured by the dim gaslight and the shadows of their hats, their cloaks. They paid her no mind, lost in their own concerns, their own journeys. She was just another lost soul, another piece of flotsam on the tide of London. The biting wind, a cruel companion, gusted again, chilling her further. It carried with it the faint, sickly sweet smell of decay from some unseen alleyway, a stark contrast to the clipped, manicured gardens she had known. Her delicate, worn gown, once a symbol of her fading status, now felt like a thin shield against the harsh realities of the street. She hugged her arms around herself, seeking warmth that simply was not there. The cold was insidious, seeping into her very core, mirroring the chill that had settled in her heart. Her muscles ached from the emotional strain, from the frantic flight, from the crushing weight of her disillusionment. Her head throbbed, a dull, persistent pain behind her eyes. Every part of her felt bruised, both inside and out. She closed her eyes for a moment, wishing for oblivion, wishing for the earth to simply swallow her whole. But the sounds of the city persisted, a harsh reminder that she was still here, still breathing, still enduring this agonizing moment of utter desolation. The minutes stretched into an eternity, marked only by the deepening cold and the occasional clang of a distant bell. She felt a profound sense of abandonment, as if the very world had decided to cast her out. Even the flickering gas lamps seemed to hold no comfort, merely illuminating her misery for anyone who cared to glance her way. But no one did. The passing crowds were a blur of motion, their faces indistinct, their voices a muffled drone. They were busy with their own lives, their own destinations, oblivious to the noblewoman weeping on their street. A tremor ran through her body, not just from the cold, but from a sudden stark fear of the night ahead. Where would she sleep? How would she eat? The practicalities of survival, which had never once crossed her mind in the sheltered walls of Blackwood Hall, now loomed like terrifying giants. She had no money, no connections, no skills suited to this brutal, unfamiliar world. Her hands, trained for embroidery and piano keys, felt useless. Her mind, accustomed to literature and social graces, felt numb. She squeezed her eyes shut again, trying to conjure an image of hope, any flicker of light in the overwhelming darkness. But there was nothing, only the black void of her despair. Her future, once uncertain but filled with the promise of Alistair, was now an empty canvas splattered with mud and ruin. The thought of spending another moment on this cold, hard ground filled her with a desperate need for change, Any change, even a terrible one. A sudden exhaustion, heavy and complete, settled over her. She felt too weak to move, too spent to cry any more tears. Her breath hitched, ragged and uneven. Her fingers, still locked around the locket, felt numb with cold. She lifted her head slowly, her neck stiff, her eyes still blurred from weeping. The world swam into focus, the gaslight casting long, distorted shadows down the narrow street. And then, through the wavering glow of a gas lamp, she saw him. A lone figure, tall and lean, walking with a steady, purposeful stride. He moved with an air of quiet determination, his broad shoulders cutting through the swirling mist of the London night. His face remained obscured by the shadows cast by the flickering light and the brim of his hat, a mystery emerging from the encroaching darkness. He was heading directly towards her, a silent, imposing presence in the desolate street. Eleanor knelt, cold seeping into her bones in London's East End. Her world had shattered. The gaslight flickered, casting shadows as she saw him. A lone man walked with purpose, a silhouette against the dim glow emerging from the mist. She watched him approach, a desperate hope flickering, then dying. What hope could a stranger offer a lady brought so low? Her honor, home, and future were gone. Tears burned, but a defiant spark ignited within her. She would not become a pawn in another's cruel game. Baron Ashworth, his heavy gaze and grasping hands, flashed before her. That fate, she knew, was worse than any death. She would not be sold like property for a ruined name. Her mother's calculating eyes, Alistair's mocking laughter, the Baron's suffocating presence, all became one unbearable weight. A surge of desperate strength pushed her to reclaim choice. Her fingers, clutching the Vance family locket, tightened until silver bit her palm. Her father's face in the tarnished frame seemed to challenge her, not pity her. "Fight, Eleanor," his memory whispered. "Fight for your honor." The words resonated in her soul. This was her last stand. She would not be swept away. With effort, she pushed up from the cold cobblestones. Her limbs ached. Her muddy gown clung to her. A shiver from chill and audacious thought ran through her. Her head spun, but resolve hardened with each breath. She fixed her gaze on the figure, now closer. He was tall, broad-shouldered, moving with unhurried confidence. Her heart pounded a frantic drumbeat of fear. Cold air burned her lungs, tasting of coal smoke. She stumbled forward, mud-caked slippers barely holding, stepping into his path. Not with grace, but with desperate determination. She had to intercept him. This was her only chance. The man paused, his stride faltering. He took in her disheveled appearance, wild hair, wide, pleading gray eyes in the gaslight. He was a stranger, yet her last, improbable hope. City murmurs, carriage clatter, and wind howls faded as her focus narrowed. His face, shadowed by his hat brim, held quiet gravity. "Sir," Eleanor whispered, her voice raw, barely audible. Her throat tightened with shame and fierce resolve. She swallowed, blinking back tears, determined not to cry before this man. He stopped, his posture a quiet question. Dark, piercing eyes met hers, holding a curious intensity that shivered her. No pity, no judgment, only weary observation. He waited, his gaze unwavering. This silent scrutiny unnerved her more than any outburst. It forced her to collect her thoughts. I have an offer for you," she managed, her voice trembling, but gaining strength. The words felt scandalous, audacious, but her only salvation. Her chest tightened, breath catching, a frantic flutter against her ribs. Lady Eleanor Vance, once of a respected house, proposed to a stranger on a grimy street. The irony was bitter yet empowering. She saw a faint shift in his expression, a hint of skepticism. He remained silent, her words hanging in the damp air. The metallic tang of fear filled her mouth. She needed to explain, but emotion trapped the words. "I am in a desperate situation," she whispered, her eyes darting, fearing onlookers. Her appearance told a tale of woe, but her disgrace was worse. She clutched her locket, cold silver and anchor. "I require a husband," she blurted out, raw and unadorned. His face remained a guarded mask, no shock, no amusement, no dismissal, only that intense, unblinking stare. It was unsettling, yet gave her fragile courage. He was listening. Not for love, she quickly added, her voice gaining frantic speed. Not for affection. She was drowning, grasping at this silent stranger. Her mind raced, sifting through her ruined life. I need a name, she continued, her voice stronger. A protector, a shield against a fate I cannot bear. Baron Ashworth's alluring face fueled her. She would beg, marry a pauper. This man could not be worse. Her disheveled appearance, the mud on her gown, her wild eyes screamed her plight. Yet her posture, despite trembling limbs, held a ghost of noble upbringing, demanding respect. I am Lady Eleanor Vance, she declared, her name a hollow echo. My family is ruined. I am to be sold into a hateful marriage. The words tumbled out, stark and honest. She offered bare facts, not the raw shame of betrayal and heartbreak. She watched his eyes, searching for understanding, for human compassion. The air thickened with unspoken questions, with her plea's enormity. I have nothing to offer in return, save my hand, she admitted, her voice dropping, her gaze falling to her muddied hands, then back to his unwavering eyes. The truth was bitter, stripped bare, with no dowry, no wealth, only a shattered reputation and pride. This was a desperate leap into the unknown. She waited, breath held, the silence thick and heavy. Gaslight cast shadows on his face, hiding his thoughts. Disgusted? Amused? Puzzled? She could not tell. His stillness unnerved her, a stark contrast to the storm within. Every muscle was taut, waiting for his verdict. I will be a dutiful wife, she pledged, with desperate conviction. I will perform my duties. I will be no burden. The words sounded hollow, a desperate bargain. She had to offer something. Wind rustled her gown, sending a chill through her shawl. She shivered, hugging herself. This desperate plan had to work. She could not return to Blackwood Hall after Alistair. The thought of Baron Ashworth was a cold dread, her gaze fixed on his face, trying to divine his thoughts. He wore simple, sturdy attire. Not a gentleman, not a ruffian, an enigma. His dark hair was disheveled, stubble on his jawline. He looked weary, carrying a heavy burden like her own. I offer you my hand in marriage, Eleanor said clearly, breathless with emotion. It was a formal declaration, shocking to a stranger on a lonely street. This was her defiant act, her desperate bid for freedom, her last stand. A proposal not of love, but of a fierce will to survive, to maintain dignity. Her fate hung precariously. She could not retreat. The words were spoken, irreversible. No going back to the naive girl who dreamed of love with Alistair. No return to the daughter who sought honor through foolish elopement. That Eleanor was gone, shattered on the floor of the Falcon's Rest Inn. This new Eleanor, desperate and defiant, stood before him, offering everything and nothing. The stranger, Mr. Julian Thorne, stopped abruptly, his intense gaze fixed on the disheveled noblewoman, his expression unreadable. Mr. Julian Thorne stopped abruptly, his intense gaze fixed on the disheveled noblewoman. The gaslight flickered above them, casting long, dancing shadows that swallowed the edges of the narrow street. His eyes, dark and sharp, moved over her mud-splattered gown, her tangled raven hair, and finally settled on her face. A flicker of something unreadable crossed his features, a mixture of surprise and profound skepticism. He did not immediately speak. The silence between them stretched, thick and heavy, punctuated only by the distant clatter of a carriage and the faint cries of a street vendor. Eleanor's breath hitched in her throat, the audacious words still echoing in the cold night air. She felt a flush rise to her cheeks, a searing humiliation that warred with the desperate resolve thrumming in her veins. Her heart pounded against her ribs like a trapped bird, each beat a painful reminder of her utter vulnerability. She waited for his scathing rejection, for the laughter or the pity, either of which would be unbearable. Yet he only looked at her, his expression a carefully constructed mask. Then Julian Thorne spoke, his voice low and steady, entirely devoid of amusement. Madam, he began, the single word a polite but firm challenge. Have you quite lost your senses? His tone was not harsh, but it carried an undeniable weight of disbelief. It was the voice of a man accustomed to reason, confronted by something utterly illogical. He made no move to step closer or to retreat, simply standing there, observing her with an unnerving intensity. Eleanor's fingers tightened around the Vance locket beneath her gown, its cold metal a small anchor in the storm of her emotions. She felt a sudden, fierce pride ignite within her. She had come too far, sacrificed too much, to cower now. She met his gaze directly, refusing to let her desperation show more than was absolutely necessary. "No, sir," she replied, her voice trembling slightly despite her efforts. "I have merely found myself in circumstances where sanity has become a luxury I can no longer afford." A muscle in his jaw twitched, the only visible sign of his internal processing. He took a slow, deliberate step, and then another, until he stood just an arm's length from her. The faint smell of damp wool and something vaguely earthy, like old books or rain-soaked soil, reached her. "Your proposal," he continued, his eyes still fixed on hers, "is beyond outlandish. You are a lady clearly, despite your present state. I am a stranger. You ask me to marry you, which way?" The why was not a question of curiosity, but of absolute demand for explanation. The cold air bit at Eleanor's exposed skin, and she shivered, pulling her tattered shawl tighter around her. She took a deep breath, trying to steady her racing thoughts. This was it. This was her one chance. She had to make him understand quickly and clearly, without revealing the full extent of her shame. "My family is in dire straits, sir," she began, her voice gaining strength as she forced herself to articulate the painful truth. "Debts, ruin." The words tasted bitter on her tongue. "To save us, my mother arranged a marriage." She paused, a flash of the Baron Ashworth's leering face entering her mind. "To a man I could never abide." Julian Thorne's dark brows furrowed slightly. He listened, his head tilted just so, as if weighing each word she uttered, searching for inconsistencies or artifice. He did not interrupt, allowing her the space to speak, which in itself was an unexpected kindness. "I tried to escape it," Eleanor confessed, her gaze dropping for a fleeting moment to the muddy cobblestones. The shame of Alistair's betrayal still burned, a raw wound on her soul. "With a man I believed loved me." She raised her eyes to his again, a flicker of raw pain visible in their gray depths. "He did not. He sought only my family's remaining scraps of fortune. He abandoned me, here, in this city, with nothing." A single tear, cold and unwelcome, traced a path down her cheek. She quickly brushed it away with the back of her hand, refusing to break. "I have no home to return to," she continued, her voice growing hoarse. "My family would be disgraced beyond repair if I return now. My honor, it is fragile." The word honor felt hollow, yet it was all she had left. To avoid that loathed marriage, to gain protection, to keep my name from utter ruin, I need a husband, a name, a shield. She spoke quickly, desperate to convey the urgency, the sheer, crushing weight of her predicament. The words tumbled out, each one a testament to her broken world. He remained impassive, his expression still unreadable, yet his attention did not waver. The silence that followed her explanation was long, filled with the buzzing of the gas lamp and the distant, muffled sounds of the city. Eleanor felt a cold dread begin to seep into her bones. She had laid bare her humiliation, and he still said nothing. Was he repulsed? Did he think her mad? She felt the weight of the world pressing down on her, the certainty of her impending ruin threatening to crush her. "I understand this is a most unconventional request," Eleanor pressed on, her voice thin but unwavering. "I do not seek affection or companionship or even true marriage in the traditional sense. This would be a marriage of convenience, sir, purely a transaction." She emphasized the last word, hoping to appeal to any practical sense he might possess. "You would gain a certain standing, perhaps, and I, my freedom from a fate worse than death." He finally moved, a subtle shift in his posture, a slight inclination of his head. "A transaction, you say?" Julian murmured, the words thoughtful, not dismissive. His gaze was still piercing, examining her as if she were a complex puzzle. He looked at the proud lift of her chin, despite her circumstances, the unwavering light in her gray eyes, the way her delicate hands clenched at her sides. He seemed to see beyond the grime and the disarray to something deeper. Eleanor swallowed hard, her throat suddenly dry. Yes, sir, my family's debts are vast, but there are properties, assets. If I am married, if I am truly independent of them, then those debts cannot wholly consume me. They cannot force me back. She knew she was oversimplifying, but the core truth remained. She needed a new identity, a new status to break free. I would require a name, a home, protection. In return, I could offer little but my word, and perhaps, eventually, some small measure of recompense once I am able. The idea of recompense felt absurd given her current state, but she had to offer something. She had to prove she wasn't entirely without resources, without value. Her gaze swept over his simple yet well-made clothes. He was not a rich man, but neither did he seem destitute. There was an air of quiet dignity about him, a steadiness that was starkly different from Alistair's superficial charm. Julian Thorne continued to observe her, his eyes narrowed slightly, as if he were calculating something in his mind. The wind picked up, swirling a few dry leaves around their feet. Eleanor felt the cold seep deeper, but she stood her ground, unwilling to break eye contact. She had offered her desperate bargain, and now she waited for his verdict. Every fiber of her being screamed with the intensity of her hope and the chilling terror of rejection. His silence was an agony, each passing second feeling like an hour. She imagined her choices without him, a life with Baron Ashworth, a life of perpetual shame and servitude, or wandering these unforgiving streets until she withered away. Neither was an option. This stranger, this quiet man, was her last impossible hope. She felt a strange certainty, a gut feeling that perhaps, just perhaps, he might be different. He had not laughed, had not immediately dismissed her. He was listening. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Julian Thorne spoke again. His voice was still calm, still measured, but there was a new quality to it, a subtle shift that sent a ripple of fragile hope through Eleanor's chest. You speak of independence from your family's debt, he stated, his words cutting through the night air. And protection. What precisely, then, would such a marriage entail for me? His gaze was still assessing, but the question itself was direct, pointed, and entirely serious. Julian's gaze remained fixed upon her, unwavering and intense, as the gaslight behind him cast long, distorted shadows that danced with the chill wind. Eleanor felt a tremor run through her, a mixture of fear and a strange, potent resolve. She gripped the tarnished locket at her throat, its cool metal a familiar anchor against the chaos swirling inside her. His question, spoken with quiet authority, still hung in the damp air between them, demanding specifics. He was listening, truly listening, and something shifted within Eleanor. This was not a man to be swayed by theatrics or pleas for pity. This was a man who required clarity. Her voice, though still raw from weeping, found a new strength, a surprising steadiness. My proposal is for a marriage of absolute convenience, Mr. Thorne, she began, choosing her words with careful precision, as if laying out terms for a difficult negotiation. A name for me, a shield against Baron Ashworth and my mother's plans. Nothing more. She watched his eyes, trying to gauge any flicker of understanding or dismissal. The cold air bit at her exposed skin, but she ignored it, focusing solely on the man before her. The distant clang of a carriage on the cobbled street faded into the background. I offer you the protection of my family's name, however tarnished it may be by debt, Eleanor continued, a faint blush rising to her cheeks at the admission. The Vance name still carries weight in certain circles. It would grant you a certain entree, perhaps, that you might not otherwise possess. She knew this was a gamble, offering a name she herself had just run from, but it was all she had left that held any perceived value in the world she knew. The wind whipped a loose strand of raven hair across her face, and she pushed it back with a trembling hand. In return, she pressed on, her gray eyes meeting his dark ones directly, I would require a husband in name only, someone who would acknowledge me as his wife, offer me a roof over my head, and protect me from those who would see me enslaved by circumstance. Her voice was low, almost a whisper now, as if speaking of such intimate details aloud was a violation. There would be no expectation of affection, no shared life beyond what is necessary to maintain appearances. She thought of Alistair's false declarations, the empty promises that had shattered her world. This new arrangement would be built on honesty, however brutal. A faint, almost imperceptible nod from Julian encouraged her to continue. He remained silent, his gaze unwavering, taking in every word, every nuance of her desperate plea. Eleanor inhaled deeply, the scent of damp earth and distant coal smoke filling her lungs. "My family is in dire straits," she confessed, her pride warring with her need for brutal honesty. "My father, God rest his soul, left us with considerable debts. My mother, Lady Beatrice Vance, seeks to marry me off to Baron Ashworth for his fortune to save Blackwood Hall." The image of her ancestral home, once grand, now crumbling, flashed before her eyes. I will not be sold to that man," she declared, her voice rising slightly with renewed fervor. The mere thought of Baron Ashworth's possessive touch sent a shiver of revulsion through her. "My honor is all I have left. This marriage, this arrangement with you, Mr. Thorne, would secure that honor. It would grant me the freedom to live my life according to my own will, not as a pawn in a transaction." She clasped her hands together, feeling the cold seep into her fingertips, but her resolve burned hotter. "I have no dowry to offer, not anymore," she admitted, her voice thick with a fresh wave of humiliation. "Alistair Finch, the man I believed I loved, betrayed me. He sought only my family's remaining assets, which are now almost entirely depleted. He abandoned me here, in these streets, with nothing but the clothes on my back." A single tear escaped, tracing a cold path down her cheek, but she did not wipe it away. It was a testament to the pain that fueled her. "What I can offer," she continued, her voice gaining a steely edge, "is my word, my discretion, my loyalty, should you require it in some unforeseen circumstance. I am not without skills. I can manage a household, oversee accounts, converse with polite society. I am a lady, Mr. Thorne, even if I stand before you like a beggar." Her chin lifted, a defiant gesture that belied her ragged appearance. She was offering herself not as a prize, but as a calculated solution, a strategic alliance. The silence that followed stretched, heavy and profound. Julian Thorne's eyes, dark and fathomless, seemed to bore into her very soul. Eleanor felt her heart thudding against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the stillness of the night. She could hear the faint, rhythmic pounding in her ears, a physical manifestation of her extreme anxiety. She had laid bare her desperation, her humiliation, her last desperate hope. Every nerve ending felt raw and exposed. She waited, anticipating rejection, preparing herself for the final crushing blow. Then Julian shifted, a slight movement that seemed to ripple through the tense air. He exhaled slowly, a wisp of vapor appearing in the cold. "A marriage of convenience," he repeated, his voice low and thoughtful, testing the words. "Protection for your name, a home for you, and a degree of social standing for me. In exchange for your discretion, your loyalty, and your skills." He paused, his gaze sweeping over her once more. A quick, almost imperceptible assessment. Eleanor held her breath, her chest tight. Every fiber of her being screamed for him to accept. Yet she also braced for the inevitable refusal. She could taste the metallic tang of fear in her mouth. The flickering gaslight cast his face in stark relief, highlighting the strong lines of his jaw and the weariness etched around his eyes. He seemed a man who had seen much, understood much, without needing many words. "You speak plainly, Lady Eleanor," Julian finally said, his tone devoid of judgment, yet carrying a weighty seriousness. "That is something I appreciate." Eleanor felt a tiny, fragile spark of hope ignite within her, a warmth in the cold core of her despair. He had called her by her own name, acknowledged her title, however tattered it felt to her now. It was a small thing, but it meant he saw her, truly saw her, beyond the disheveled mess she presented. "My life is not one of grandeur or society balls, Lady Eleanor," he cautioned, his voice firm, drawing her back from the precipice of relief. "My circumstances are modest by your standards. You would not find yourself in a manor house, nor would you attend lavish entertainments." He paused again, letting his words sink in. "My work often takes me to places that are not considered refined." It requires discretion, absolute discretion. Eleanor met his gaze, her own resolve hardening. I understand, Mr. Thorne, she replied, her voice steady now, infused with a new, quiet strength. I seek not luxury, but safety. Not society, but sanctuary. I have seen enough of grandeur to know its hollow core. The memory of Alistair's betrayal, his avarice, still stung, but it also clarified her purpose. Discretion is something I can offer wholeheartedly. My desire is to disappear from my old life, not to cling to its vestiges. Julian regarded her for another long moment, his eyes searching hers as if for any hidden agenda or lingering romantic delusion. He must have found what he sought, for a faint, almost imperceptible nod finally graced his lips. Very well, Lady Eleanor, he said, his voice quiet but resonant, carrying the weight of his decision. I accept your terms. A wave of profound relief washed over Eleanor, so intense it almost buckled her knees. Her vision blurred for a moment, the world seeming to spin before her eyes. She wanted to weep, to collapse, to scream with the sheer, unburdened release that surged through her, but she held herself together, forcing her trembling hands to remain still. This was a fragile agreement, a desperate pact, and she would not jeopardize it with a display of weakness. However, Julian continued, his voice cutting through her momentary reprieve, I have my own conditions. Firstly, as you stated, this marriage will be in name only. There will be no demands made upon me as a husband, nor I upon you as a wife, beyond the maintenance of appearances and mutual respect. Our lives, apart from that, will remain our own. He articulated each point with precision, his gaze sharp and unwavering. Eleanor nodded, her throat tight. This was exactly what she had proposed, yet hearing him state it so coldly, so unequivocally, still sent a strange pang through her. It was the stark reality of her new, lonely path, but it was a path she had chosen. Secondly, he went on, my privacy is paramount. There will be no probing into my affairs, no questions about my work or my past, unless I choose to share them with you. And I expect the same courtesy in return. What you choose to tell me of your former life will be your decision alone. He watched her carefully, ensuring she understood the gravity of his stipulation. The flickering gaslight danced across his serious features. I understand, Eleanor managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. She thought of her father's quiet strength, the way he had always valued his own counsel. This man, Julian Thorne, held a similar air of self-possession, a formidable independence. Thirdly, and perhaps most importantly, there must be absolute honesty between us on matters pertaining to our shared public life, he concluded. Should questions arise or situations demand a united front, we will present one. We will be partners in this deception, but never deceitful with one another about its purpose. He held her gaze, a profound seriousness in his eyes. Eleanor felt a peculiar sense of calm settle over her, despite the wild tumult of her emotions. He was offering her not just a name, but a peculiar form of partnership, an alliance built on pragmatism and a strange, unspoken understanding. He saw her dignity, recognized her resolve, and respected her plight. This was not Alistair's false charm, nor Baron Ashworth's possessive greed. This was something different, something stark and real. I agree to your terms, Mr. Thorne, she said, her voice clear and strong, leaving no room for doubt. She extended her own hand, a gesture of solemn commitment, mirroring the formal exchanges she had witnessed in her father's study during business dealings. The cold wind still swirled around them, carrying the distant murmur of the city, but in that small circle of gaslight, a profound agreement had been forged. Julian Thorne looked at her outstretched hand for a moment, his dark eyes searching hers one last time. A flicker, quick as a shadow, crossed his face, perhaps curiosity, perhaps a hint of reluctant compassion. Then slowly, deliberately, he extended his own hand. His fingers were strong and warm as they closed around hers, a stark contrast to the biting cold of the night air. The contact was brief, firm, and entirely devoid of romantic pretense, yet it felt like an anchor in her storm-tossed world. It was a promise, unspoken but deeply felt, a pact sealed under the vast, indifferent London sky. The cold air bit at Eleanor's skin, a sharp contrast to Julian's fleeting warmth. Their pact, sealed moments ago, felt both fragile and unbreakable in the quiet night. Fear's bitter tang lingered, but a new sensation, a tiny ember of relief, flickered inside her. Julian walked with purpose, a silent, steady presence beside her on the grimy streets. Gas lamps sputtered, casting long shadows that distorted familiar buildings. A distant night watchman cried out. A horse and cart clip-clopped. Sounds alien to Blackwood Hall. Damp earth mingled with acrid coal smoke. A raw, urban perfume filling her lungs. Her worn slippers scuffed the cobblestones. A quiet rhythm against the confident stride of the man beside her. Julian Thorne did not speak. Eleanor found herself grateful for his silence. Her mind raced, a tumultuous sea of despair, defiance, and fragile hope. She wondered if he regretted his sudden decision. Her heart pounded, a different beat now, not dread, but the wild thrum of an uncertain future. She clutched the Vance locket, its cool silver a familiar comfort against her skin. This man, a stranger, was her only anchor in a world turned upside down. She watched his strong profile, briefly lit by a carriage lamp, wondering what thoughts lay behind his watchful eyes. After what felt like an eternity, Julian stopped before a modest two-story building. A single clean lamp cast a soft glow from a ground-floor window. It was not grand like Blackwood Hall, but held quiet respectability. A faint scent of wood and lavender drifted from the open door Julian gently pushed. Inside, the air was warm. A small bell tinkled. Mrs. Davies, a kind woman in an apron, emerged from a back room. She nodded to Julian with familiarity, her gaze briefly curious on Eleanor. "Good morning, Mr. Thorne," the woman said softly. "And to you, Mrs. Davies," Julian replied, his low voice soothing Eleanor's frayed nerves. "We need a room for the night, and a quiet corner, if you please." Mrs. Davies's kind eyes held a knowing glint. She simply nodded, her gaze lingering on Eleanor's disheveled appearance but offering no judgment. Eleanor felt a blush rise to her cheeks, her noble pride stinging her. Yet an unexpected safety settled in this unassuming place. Her shoulders dropped. She realized how taut fear and exhaustion had made her. Mrs. Davies led them to a small parlor with a sturdy table and two comfortable chairs. A half-finished cup of tea sat there, still steaming faintly. The quiet hum of the house spoke of a life far from her grand, empty former home. Julian gestured for Eleanor to sit. She sank into the chair, her legs trembling slightly, the exhaustion finally catching up to her. Mrs. Davies returned with a fresh cup of tea, its simple, unadorned warmth a lifeline. Julian sat opposite her, his gaze steady, observant, but not intrusive. He waited for her to speak, but the words felt lodged in her throat. "We must formalize this quickly," Julian said at last, cutting the silence. "Tomorrow, if possible." Eleanor's breath hitched. "Tomorrow," she whispered, the word heavy with implications. "What then?" Julian leaned back, his dark eyes unwavering. "A quiet life, perhaps a new name for you? We agreed on convenience, protection, and privacy for you. My conditions remain." "Yes, I remember," Eleanor replied, her voice gaining strength. She hesitated, a deeper question unvoiced. "Will you tell me of yourself, Mr. Thorne?" He regarded her. A shadow crossed his features. "In time, Lady Eleanor. For now, rest. We have much to do." His few words carried a weight, a quiet authority Eleanor found herself strangely trusting. His promises, unlike Alistair's honeyed lies, felt like stone. He was a man who kept his word, even to a desperate stranger. Mrs. Davies showed Eleanor to a small, neat room upstairs. It contained only a narrow bed, a small table, and a single wooden chair. A small, cracked mirror hung on the wall above the basin. Sparse but clean, the room overlooked a quiet, cobbled alleyway. The air still held the faint, sweet scent of lavender. Eleanor placed her small bag on the floor, still clutching the locket. She walked to the mirror. Her reflection stared back at her with wind-and-remain, tired gray eyes. The woman in the glass was not the Lady Eleanor Vance who left Blackwood Hall hours before. Her raven hair, usually pinned, fell in disheveled waves. Her elegant gown was creased and stained, her face smudged with dirt and streaked with dried tears. This was not the noble daughter, promised to a baron, nor the hopeful bride eloping with a rogue. This was a stranger, forged in betrayal and desperation. Her gray eyes now held a sharp resilience, replacing their former softness. A faint line etched between her brows marked the night's agony and her fierce decision. She touched the cool, cracked glass, her fingertips tracing the unfamiliar contours of her own face. The noble woman was gone. The broken girl was gone. A survivor remained, pulled from the abyss by raw, primal will. She thought of Alistair's empty words, his cynical laughter echoing in her mind. Then she thought of Julian Thorne, his quiet strength, unwavering gaze, calm words. No grand love, no passionate declarations, but a promise of safety, a new beginning. Not the future she envisioned, but one she chose, defying a fate that sought to crush her. She unclasped the Vance locket, holding it in her palm. Her father's face, miniature and faded, looked up at her. He had taught her of honor, of strength, of the family name. She had almost lost it all, had almost allowed herself to be extinguished. Julian offered a chance to reclaim it, to rebuild from shattered dreams. She no longer ran from a forced marriage, nor chased false love. She was stepping into the unknown, with open eyes and a quiet, fierce determination. As dawn broke, painting the alley with pale light, Eleanor felt a fragile peace. First birdsong pierced the quiet, and the city stirred to life. She had lost everything known to her, every comfort, every illusion. Yet, in that loss, she gained something more valuable, a life truly her own, chosen by her. With Julian Thorne, whose silent gaze promised more than Alistair's empty words, a new unpredictable chapter began.